Hey guys, it's Yui, and I have my friend Avalon here. My good friend Avalon. I'm gonna plug you. We're plugging today, and
Hell
we're
yeah.
plugging on this platform, watching Jia Zhangke's platform from 2000, which is, I mean, we could just call it like a masterpiece, right? Like we could just
Oh
call it,
yeah. I mean, it's like one of my top 10 favorite movies ever. So,
yeah, yeah, yeah. Jia doesn't really miss except for some of his documentaries, so we could have picked any of his stuff, but we decided this is kind of like his first big touchstone.
hmm
And we're going to do a little bit of a commentary on it. And if you're listening, you could just listen to this as kind of like a podcast, or you can stick up the movie and watch alongside us. Um, the version we're using is the one on the Criterion channel as of right now. So if you would like to, like play that and then play the video at the same time, we're going to be saying three, two, one, go, and then we'll be starting the movie and commenting over it. All right, Evelyn, you ready?
yep, I'm good to go.
All right. Three, two, one, go. Oh, I love that spinny disc logo.
Yeah, such a great comfort to see the Criterion logo.
Yes, as soon as I see that motherfucker, that C, and I see that goddamn two-faced guy,
I
yeah,
see I see Janice. Yeah.
I'm like, oh boy, oh it's Kino.
It's Kino indeed. This certainly is Kino. Just right off the bat, the importance of sound in this movie.
Yeah, a little bit blaring. Yeah,
Also great to notice that like the film he was already doing co-productions at this time before he even got big.
yeah. Well, I guess we could start off talking about this is one of his three like pre uh mainland distributed films, I suppose.
Yeah,
At least like
or
that were like legally allowed.
yeah, because the world was the first one. So Unknown Pleasures, this, and Xiao Wu were all sort of banned, basically.
Yeah, and it's it I've seen a lot of like commentating on Ja's like he had like there's like this underground period now. Like I wouldn't
hmm
exactly say that he's like a state sanctioned filmmaker, but like
Oh God, no.
it's interesting to see like looking back on the critical discourse about this movie in particular. It's like you
hmm
have people looking at this and being like, "Oh, the leading light," and then like as soon as he makes the world, people are like, "Oh, this motherfucker's sold out," and I'm like, "Oh, what the hell are you talking about? You fucking nuts."
Yeah. No, it is interesting to look at his work that way, because I think stylistically he has evolved over time. But I think some principles stuck at least. But like I think these scenes are a really good example of I guess this period of his style where it's very slow cinema in which there's a stillness to every shot. There's almost like a tableau sort of quality to it. There's a lot of negative space in the frame. And it kind of fits, I mean, the sort of I guess theatrical the the theater performance that's being depicted right now, you know? And obviously, I guess just to start off, like the film begins in 1979, sort of at the first year or two of the Deng Xiaoping era, right after the Cultural Revolution. And so I think, as we see here, some of the cultural remnants of that period of the Cultural Revolution are still here. The sort of Maoist performance troupe um, that's basically performing like they're gonna mention a famous sort of exemplary rural commune that was very much used as an example for other communes during the Cultural Revolution. So we're starting off in that historical period, basically. And obviously, like with the train, the theme of the train and platforms has already emerged as well. So Jaws really front loading us with a lot of the thematic richness of the film.
Yeah, we start off with people framed by portraiture, and then we transition to the
hmm
theater. And for me, like looking back on especially these early Jia films, he to me he's like a combination of Ho Shen and Antonioni, where
Absolutely.
he's not like totally like immobile, like a lot of early Hoshashin is.
Hmm.
Like, but he's very still. But like when he does employ camera moves, they remind me a lot of stuff in like the Alienation trilogy in the '60s, and he's got such a delicate idea of when that should happen. And he gets a little bit more like loose and free as career goes on, which kind
Hmm.
of starts with the world, and like as soon as he goes into digital, basically,
Oh yeah,
it starts to like radically transform his style. But this, like,
yeah.
for me, what I like about this film is that it's so self-consciously rigorous that like the last time I watched this, I was like just totally exhausted by it, because like
Hmm.
it is a film that puts you through the paces of uh like temporal space, right? Like when you're with these
Exactly. Yeah.
characters, they're always framed as being a part of like a group and the collective, especially, and you feel like like in this part when they're having the roll call, right? Like you're
Hmm.
engaging with the awkwardness and like every single bit of the minutia of their lives, and so when you get to later scenes where like things start changing, you feel already like you have this history with them, because you've gone through these like minor little daily tasks and rituals that they as a performing troupe have undergone.
Yeah, no, that's a good point because I think generally the way people approach jazz use of duration and of long takes is that they think it sort of preserves a social realism, and that's kind of the case. But I think what's most important, as you were talking about, is capturing the subjective experience of just waiting. And again, this the title of the film platform, waiting for a train, waiting for something to come to take you away. This theme of the weariness and the sort of tiredness of having to wait for something to happen, I think is really interesting, because I think the way platform approaches capturing this interesting decade in Chinese history is it's not as dramatic of a transformation as the Cultural Revolution in like a very sort of superficial sense. But I mean, anyone who looks back on that decade from, whether you're a Marxist looking at it from a materialist perspective or just someone looking back on it from a purely like, how daily life in China changed sort of perspective, it was somewhat silent. And in the moment, you felt like it was sort of just like these few small things changing. But in the grand scheme, there was a much larger transformation. And I guess in that sense, the film is a true epic because it over the course of its runtime it captures that change, but in each scene you don't necessarily feel anything super dramatic happening.
Definitely, definitely. I mean, I think Ja has two epics. I think it's this, and I think it's Ash's Purest White. Like those,
Hmm.
like feel like his most self-consciously epic.
Yeah, definitely. And also, it was interesting you brought up Hoshio Shan, because in an interview he gave in Senses of Cinema, he actually mentioned. I mean, he went to the Beijing Film Academy, so he did have training, like proper training, I guess, quote unquote, in filmmaking. And there he mentioned that like Hoshio Shan and Ozu were his two biggest influences at the time, which you can totally see. I mean, as we've been talking about, his use of stillness, the use of negative space, um it definitely has that sort of inflection to it.
Yeah, I would definitely say that, like with the Ozu influence, it very much strikes me how like Ozu is very clearly to me like a moralist filmmaker, and
Yeah.
very like like he is essentially didactic, right? Like he makes his films about the subjects that he's really concerned about, and he makes like an explicit object of like the focus of the film is like, okay, now you are like joining in the domestic concerns of these family groups and things like that.
Hmm.
Whereas Ja, I like how he's a little bit elliptical. He's a little bit, even as he gets looser in his style, he still maintains a distance from his characters. Um, and it's, you could obviously go into the realm of, oh, this is a, like a documentarian's eye, basically, and just
Hmm.
letting his subjects and like not imposing too much on, the frame, and like just letting things pass and like not having to construct an artificial sense of duration via editing.
Yeah, and I think like part of the strength of that, I guess, of that sort of documentarian quality or of this adherence to a kind of somewhat social objectivity, as we can see in like this shot, just like the picture of who I believe is Zhou Enlai in the background, or just like the constant presence of sound. Like Jia talked about this in an interview about this film. For him, like sound was such an important dimension because that was a method of capturing the atmosphere of the time. Just having the radio play in the background and hearing, government broadcasts, hearing various radio plays, or just the change in music taste in the time. He really does it a fantastic job, and I wonder how he did it. Granted, a lot of places in China at the time still looked like this, but sort of like really authentically capturing the atmosphere of the period that he was depicting.
Yes, and a lot of it ends up just being very. It reminds me of that '70s style of like recording uh, dialogue, and especially like Western movies, where you'll watch something like Alien, and half of the time people will be talking over each other, and like you can't really tell, like what's the noise in the background, and like
Hmm.
there's there's definitely a visual and auditory ambience that creates a huge depth, I think, of composition where like you have already, these very pared back ideas of what you're seeing, but then beyond that, you hear things like that the frame is not capturing, and so it feels just really immense and gigantic. And like you said, it has that epic quality to it.
Yeah. Oh, okay. These next few scenes are great to me. Like, this really captures, I think, the generational split within China between, like, I would say, like my parents' generation and my grandparents' generation. Like, their approach to politics, their views on communist China and just popular culture. The younger generation is definitely embracing these more so-called like Western mentality. Like, yeah, like that line, do your own self-criticism, like the remnants of the Mao era, and sort of trying to apply it to these like youth in the Deng era who just really don't give a shit.
Yeah, yeah. And forgive me if I'm incorrect about this, but like this whole beginning part of the film is set and photographed in Jia's hometown.
Yes,
Or
Feiyang in Shanxi province, yes.
yeah, and he goes back to like it's very much like a obsession his work of like returning to this place of his origins through
Oh
various
yeah.
perspectives of his characters. And with this one, you like you really get a sense of like the weary winter like ambience of the place. Like it's very like fucking bleak, and just like the brutality of like the gray stone architecture. Like it's not quite modernist, right? But it's like
No, yeah.
it's industrial, and it's not like brutalist because it's not even articulated in a like an aesthetic way. It's just so like it's a monolith that you can't escape from, and it feels like the entire town is this um like bracketed maze with just buildings with straight sides and no ornamentation, and covered in fucking snow and mud. And like you could definitely like put yourself in the perspective of these characters where it's like it's freezing outside, but they want to wear these Western jeans.
The bell bottoms, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh yeah, I
And
forgot their bell bottoms.
oh yeah, yeah, no. Oh, I love this scene that's about to again talking about that generational split. Oh man, I can only imagine the kinds of conversations that like happened in this generation. And yeah, he's gonna talk about, can you like labor in these genes? And he's just like, well, I am an artistic worker. And like that, I guess like not to go too deep into it, but I guess you could read it as like the reinstatement of a kind of a division, like a capitalist division of labor in the sort of Deng era following the Cultural Revolution, where this sort of ideological dedication to a kind of equalization of what people are allowed to do has sort of been tossed aside. in favor of just pure like building up of productive forces or whatever. So, I mean, that's just such a great little scene that I think captures that at such a nice level. But to go back to what you were talking about with regards to like the architecture and just the feeling of Fenyang in this film, I live in Beijing, which is obviously a little very different because it's like one of the main cities in the country. But I don't live too far from Shanxi province. It's all sort of in the northeastern area of China, and yeah, you always get this feeling of just like this sort of weird in between state where there was a time where it was this highly industrialized, productive space that led the development of China under Mao. That's sort of just been allowed to go to waste as all of the economic activity was concentrated around the coast, as China was, connecting itself to the capitalist world market. Um, and I think that sort of weird in between space that a lot of people in China found themselves in this early Deng period again goes back to this theme of like just this the empty space. I mean, this sort of weariness and this sort of sense like of just being tired and of not really knowing what's going to happen and just waiting for something to happen. And your earlier Antonioni comparison, I think, is very apt because Deleuze sort of uses Antonioni as the example of how his use of empty space gave birth to the time image. And I think like Jia in this film is very much sort of using the time image to, using time for time's sake, the experience of time as its own sort of cinematic goal beyond any sort of narrative or, character related goals.
Yeah, and in this scene, we kind of, really have a, a coming together of the group that we're going to follow for the rest of the movie, outside of
Mm-hmm.
the group context and the performance troupe. Uh, and like, it's given how, again, much more subjective his later work becomes. It's just so, it's like looking back on like the way he introduces Zhao Tao's character in this. It's so low key. It's so pared back. Like where,
Mm-hmm.
like honestly, if you were watching this, you could be like, oh well, like it's hard to even like see her face that clearly,
Right.
because of the grainy stock. So like you're wondering like, okay, like you're so, you really have to capture these characters with how they react to each other's physicality. And yeah, it's seeing only foreign films is a bad
Yeah,
influence.
her dad is like still an old Maoist from like the Cultural Revolution. Like, this is Western imperialism or cultural chauvinism or whatever. And of course, like the huge Lenin and Stalin portraits are right above them. And I mean, you make an interesting point that this is sort of the first moment in the film where we sort of get the core group of characters, the two couples, separate from the larger culture performance troupe. But even then, I think Ja doesn't really turn this film into like individual narratives as like that scene shows with the huge portraits above them, or as like this conversation they're gonna have on the city wall. Like the social context or the general atmosphere is so much more overwhelming than any of these individual characters can be. So I think it just adds to the sense that a lot of the historical transformations that they're experiencing are sort of out of their control, and I think the passivity in their performances sometimes is a reflection of that at a subjective level.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but see, like this, like we're like, we're almost 20 minutes into the movie, and
Mm-hmm.
like we're finally getting like just medium shots at the very least. So you're like, okay,
Right, right. I don't think there are any. I think there's only like two close-ups in the film. The last time I checked.
oh my god, yeah. Looking at this, it's like so fucking like. At once, it's a little bit like charming and homely because of like the winter atmosphere,
I
but
actually kind of miss it, if I'm being honest.
yeah, yeah. Maybe I don't know what I'm missing because I've never been there. I I'll tell you what, Chicago doesn't look this good in the winter. It doesn't look this picturesque.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, China does benefit from centuries of traditional architecture, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's what I mean about this is that it's like you have these like ancient structures, but then like they don't, but they're not covered in ornamentation, right? Like it feels
Mhm.
like this part right here, like it almost feels like a digital space because of
Right,
the
yeah.
sheer stillness and the absence of like any real variance in like what
Mhm.
the structures are like. And it's like this right here, like I think I've been to this place in Dark Souls, like but it's like it's rendered with such beauty. I mean, this is like a perfect shot right here. Like
Oh, it's brilliant,
the
yeah.
way it utilizes like these tunnels and just, I mean, I don't know, really, like I'd find it hard to even criticize this much given the way that like it just draws your eye to all these great points in the frame and allows the actors just to inhabit the space.
Yeah, I mean, I was so in preparation for this, I revisited actually Paul Schrader's introduction to his book on transcendental style. And he has this funny little diagram of like where he places filmmakers in his like weird system. It's
Oh, he's got a political
yeah.
compass.
No, he's got like a Hegelian like triangle.
Oh, even
And
better.
yeah, it's great. And he has like three categories, and he puts Jia in a category he calls the mandala, which is basically like a kind of cinema that's focused on like this meditative quality. And I think scenes like this, where there is this stillness of the location, really reflects this sort of meditative capacity that the film I think also has. And also like another dimension of his diagram, he has a Tarkovsky ring around the whole triangle. And whenever a film pierces past the Tarkovsky triangle to him, it's like the film goes from film festival cinema to art gallery cinema.
Oh,
And
incredible.
that's interesting because Ja actually pierces past into art gallery cinema, and I think that's true because like the tableau quality of at least like this early period of cinema definitely feels like some of the sort of social realist like documentary and photography that I saw in a lot of like art galleries in Beijing. In Beijing, we have a art district called 798, where a lot of sort of are somewhat depicting this in China is very prevalent. So I think jazz is very much tapping into a very well established sort of artistic tradition in contemporary China.
Right, right. Yeah, I need to fucking read that Schrader book because I love his
Oh, it's
films and
great.
I just need to like like dive deep into that because I like you describing that diagram made me excited. It just sounds
Oh,
incredible.
it's fantastic. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
this shot! Oh
yeah.
my god, this shot
Oh,
right
it's
here.
so good.
This
The
is wonderful.
lighting, it's impeccable. Yeah,
Well, no,
yeah,
just
yeah.
the way that it utilizes like, I mean, this is like a total film image to me where
Mhm.
you have the distance, you have the top and the bottom, like everything is full.
Right.
Like there's no like, but it's not like negative space like being absent, but it's more like there's almost like a diorama quality to a lot of this stuff.
Mhm.
Like the camera's put in a place where it's just to make it look and like frame people exactly as they would be in um like this like like, again, it's the thing that Antonioni does where it's like a like he'll have Monica Vitti just like lean on something just for the sake of having her like being in the right place at the right time, and like like the part in La Note when she turns off the lights and it's just like
Right.
okay, like it's that kind of thing where it's just the total awareness of a performer's body and how to make the most out of that, which I think is like such a underrated and really I don't want to say a forgotten art, but like definitely something that I think doesn't get remarked on enough in terms of like how to block good basically.
Yeah. Oh, this exchange of dialogue is great. And then I love how even in Deng, like this line right here, even in Dengist China, the Soviets are still the revisionists.
Yeah, I know, incredible, man.
It's so funny. It's such a nice reference. I also will say like the song playing on the radio right now by Deng Lijun, who is like a really she was like one of the first big like Taiwanese pop stars to really break through in China. And I watched a really good documentary about Jia Zhangke. I think it's called A Guy from Feiyang. I think that's what the film is called. And
Yes.
he revisits the locations for this film, as including the city wall. He actually literally is like standing there and he's talking about wanting to leave his small town. And he talked about like the change in culture and how hearing these love songs from Taiwan and Hong Kong for the first time really opened up for a lot of people in this generation the possibility of a kind of like individualism in art, as opposed to, I guess, the more collective nature of art in the Cultural Revolution or Mao era China. So
Yeah, the idea
those
of like art
yeah.
as the personal expression.
Right, exactly. Yeah, literally, yeah. The idea that you could love just another person and not the party, you know?
Yeah, I mean, really, if you want to like chart his preoccupations, just compare like the performances in this movie, like especially at this beginning part where it's all like, you know, collective and like very much oriented around, okay, like here's all our coordination and like we're this group that's like, performing this specific thing, and then
Right.
compare that to Zhao Tao and Mountains May Depart, where like the end of the film is her own like private dance that no one sees but her, and like like
Exactly, yeah.
seemingly a tune that no one hears but she does.
Yeah, no, and I think even within this film, you see that transformation. I won't spoil anything too much, but like,
Oh, I have to
there's
listen to a commentary. There's no spoilers.
yeah, I just saying like there are a few moments in this film of like individuals dancing that are so striking. I mean, I've talked to you about this before, but there's one particular scene about Zhao Tao dancing to a song that I sent you right before we started recording. That is like one of my favorite scenes in all of film history,
Hell
basically.
yeah! You know what?
So yeah.
Is Jia Zhangke underrated dance filmmaker?
Oh, definitely. Oh, big time.
Yeah, I think we have to put him up there.
No,
I think.
any Chinese filmmaker is like, look, you go to China and you just hang out on a regular evening, you'll see like old ladies dancing in the public square like every day in like every city and town.
Oh
And like
man.
he totally captures that energy. Like the YMCA dance scene in, was it Ashes Pierced White or Mountains May Depart where that happens? I think it was Ashes Pierced White. No, he's totally underrated. Oh,
It's
this
like
is
this.
a yeah.
This is a fucking like it's an overused phrase, but this is really like painterly. Like
It
this,
is, yeah.
like tell me this is not like these early bits in this movie are not like social realist painting. Just
No, they totally are.
because
Yeah.
it's it's specifically the idea of like placing the frame to where you're like contorting the bodies of people into like positions that don't get depicted in like what we could call like like classical like post Raphaelite quote unquote bourgeois art, or like like it's like all those paintings of like Lenin where he's just kind of like standing around in like a wheat field or whatever. It's
Oh, yeah, yeah,
like
yeah.
there's an idea of like time and place and the orientation of people, like it's like, oh, like this family eating dinner, or
Mhm.
putting that in a way where it's not like trying to be glamorous, but in its own way it kind of possesses an eye of glamour.
Yeah, I mean, I like how you talked about the contortion of the bodies and stuff, because like in this scene and the previous scene where they were listening to the radio, all the human bodies in here just like they carry so much weight, it seems. Like they're always sort of bent over,
They're
leaning
wearing the
against
huge
something.
coats.
They're yeah, the huge coats, they're lounging around, they have the hats on. There's always this sense that they're sort of beaten down by like history almost.
Yeah, that's the name of my autobiography. Beaten down by history.
And yeah, no, I mean that's probably a good name for autobiography for a lot of people. And what was I gonna say? Yeah, that painterly quality you described. I think it's just the colors too, because I wouldn't
Yeah,
say it's
the earthy
saturated.
colors.
Yeah, but it's like the colors do stand out, but there's a faded quality to them. But they still sort there's still there's still something distinctive about it. Like I don't know, I guess it's just my personal experience, but there are, as I said earlier, there are a lot of places in China where people still dress like this or love clothes from this period or places that still look like this. And it does make me feel a bit nostalgic if I'm being real with you. And I think it's interesting, like Jaws. I don't think Ja is like, as you said, he's not didactic. So he doesn't have like a single fixed take on like the Mao versus Deng period and how we should think about it politically. But I do think that like he has mentioned in interviews that he is quite critical of the changes of the Deng period. So I won't say that he has like a nostalgia for the Cultural Revolution at all. Like no, but I think a sense of rootedness or just like the iron rice bowl that was protected and offered during the Mao period sort of disintegrating. I think there is a sort of loss of that, sense of home and fixedness. And I think that's why he's so fixated on this like on like returning home and this idea of like wanting to leave but ultimately returning to where you came from. Because most Chinese narratives from this period, and my parents talk to me about this all the time, is all about leaving China and never coming back. And
Oh, holy shit.
my parents' generation basically did that. Like most of my parents' friends left to the States and just never came back. And my parents did the opposite. So I was always instilled with, I think, Jia's mentality of like, ultimately, there is something for you here in China, and you shouldn't disown that entirely. And I think, um, yeah, so I think I always value Jia's perspective on that, basically, which is why I think his films, ironically, even though most Westerners read them as like, this fiery critique of the failures of the totalitarian communist regime, they weirdly give me a sense of home and a sense of like a place that I belong to.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should definitely address like the critical reception that he's undergone because
Right,
I feel
yeah.
like half of it is like disingenuous bullshit. Like
Oh, totally.
I really do feel like not that like people are like if you enjoy the films like for whatever reason like okay that's good. I like the idea that it's being recognized, but I feel there's this sense of like either he's placed as like like a western leaning filmmaker in the mainland, or he's like supposedly like this like deeply rooted chronicler of like the Chinese identity. And I'm like, well, like to abstract him into either realm I think says more about the person writing that piece than necessarily him, because I think he like
Mm.
leans in a whole bunch of different directions and he's very flexible. He addresses a lot of different perspectives and subjects in his movies, and I don't think I think if he went out of his way to like be uber explicit about X and Y, I think it would be
Mhm.
intolerable, and also I don't think he would
Oh
get any of his
yeah.
films made.
No, totally. Yeah. I mean, okay, here's a great scene of like just quickly noting this like the transformation in the performance troops performances away from the Maoist the traditional Maoist model plays or whatever kind of style with this sort of new pop music that's sort of emerging. And him singing about the 80s generation and this new generation. It's
Well, it's
it's
also
really
like he's
yeah.
framed as like a speaker against a crowd, right? Like
Right,
it's
exactly. Yeah. But yeah, I mean to touch on what you were just saying about his openness, like in interviews whenever he's asked like are you trying to capture are you trying to chronicle like your specific hometown? Are you trying to chronicle like this Chinese national identity? And he was like, on the one hand, like no, like he is striving to depict like narratives that and characters that are more universal than just Feiyang or Shanxi province. But on the other hand, he also does say like, Chinese national identity. It's like what the hell does that mean? I mean he doesn't say this explicitly, but what I get from him, he sort of says, he is concerned with capturing the stories of those who have been marginalized in Chinese society and those who live on the margins. And I mean, it's sort of the classic like Marxist, notion. Like if you take sides with one class over the other, this conception of like a coherent national identity is complete bullshit and doesn't exist anymore. So, I think Jia, as insofar as he's like a chronicler of Chinese history, at once he is picking sides. I think he's ultimately siding with a sort of rural peasantry or a sort of the early nascent proletariat of the very recently industrialized rural areas under Mao, and how they were totally fucked over by Deng's reforms, and locating within that specific class something themes that are universal. You know, if that makes any sense.
No, I think it definitely does. It, it's a struggle because honestly, as someone who's like so ignorant of like a lot of the historical details that he addresses, I can only really see like a lot of the universalist statements, you know. So like when you point out like, oh, it's this song like by this person, like I, you know, when I watch these, like I can pick up in you know, in a touch of sin when like there's references to Hong Kong movies like Green Snake, or
Right.
in what is it? Ashes Purest White, when like there's so many bits about heroic bloodshed and the killer, and you know the idea of kind of like the gangster romantic figure, like that stuff, you know, like but I think that also like is a testament to like he's not like a provincial figure despite his obsession with the with that province.
Uh-huh.
He's very interested in a plurality of identities that assemble in his movies, because you also have in the world you have that that Russian expat who joins
Right. Yeah, yeah.
their performance bit in that, and like that is like the most like depressing part of that movie.
Oh, it's
And
awful when she gets her
so
passport taken away and stuff. Yeah.
that shit breaks me. That, oh my god,
Yeah.
I remember watching that for this time. I was like, holy shit. And, um, yeah, but it's I feel like the Western critical gaze in regards to Ja does go into that like one of those polarized directions, right? Because I think that makes him easier to comprehend from a critical lens and say, oh, okay, well, he's this type of thing, right? Or like, you know, it's like how you know, I'm just starting to get into him, but it's like how
Hmm.
you like could say like, oh, Jean-Luc Godard, he's like anti-American, right? Or something like he's
Right.
anti-American capitalism. But like, you know, but like, a lot of the early films I've seen of him, it's like he has a very loving relationship with, you know, like classic American Hollywood cinema. You know, he's very much like a studious admirer of noir, and you know,
Hmm.
like you cannot say that he's like making like a unilateral condemnation when you see Alphaville, and it's, you know, like I mean, Alphaville is like the prototype for fucking shit like Blade Runner. It really is like
Hmm.
it totally you know, is it's so in love with noir that it like updates it into this new post-atomic realm. And yeah, yeah, I suppose it's just more like a diatribe against like the Western critical eye in especially in England and America, where it
Hmm.
seems more like there's a more of an interest in fitting filmmakers into like, you know, discernible boxes than actually engaging with the material, right? It's like, oh, it's easier to
Hmm.
talk about Ja than it is to actually watch his movies and try to, you know, really parse through them. Because I when we were doing the now infamously aborted Millennium Mambo commentary,
Yeah,
we
yeah.
also talked about like how like Ho Shin kind of gets like put as like, oh man, he's like a biting political filmmaker. And I think it's like, well, I think he definitely makes movies that engage with that subject, but also, I mean, I don't know, like, is The Assassin really a movie about politics? I couldn't
Right,
tell you.
yeah.
I mean, really, you know, if it is, I wouldn't know, but it doesn't really like seem that way from the way it's presented. And so it's like this, right? Like, you know, when someone in the West and like the Hollywood apparatus, you know, makes a movie, right? You're reading politics into it, right? You're inserting them into
Yeah.
it, right?
Uh-huh.
Whereas like any non-Western filmmaker now, like they become like, oh well, now I'm like this standard bearer for this whole history of, you know, yeah, oppression or digression or like a critical understanding of, you know, this point in history. And yeah, it's like it's you know, it's a bullshit double standard, I feel.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, like, so the past few scenes that we've just traversed are so great, like back to back to back. The just the richness of the world that Jazz really depicting, and I
I
think
love
like
the teacher. I love him. He's
yeah,
so good.
yeah. But even just like the fact that we had two shots back to back that juxtapose a portrait of Teresa Teng and Mao Zedong is so great to me. Just showing like literally back to back the night and day transformation of China culturally over this period. But like, yeah, it's like details like that where I think sort of the retained Cold War intellectual bankruptcy of most Western critics in approaching films that are somewhat critical of China. I think that's another failure on their part because I think the nuances of what exactly happened in the Deng era, it tends to be portrayed as like, oh, it's this great cultural liberalization, economic liberalization,
They
and
got
then
their freedom, quote unquote.
yeah, and I'm like, no. Like, actually, one of the first things that Deng did was remove the right to strike and the right to hold big debates that Mao put into the constitution, for example. So it was really interesting that Jia was sort of depicting that scene where all of them were talking together. Oh my god, rehabilitated Liu Shaoqi. Yeah, the revisionists the capitalist rotors are coming back. Anyways, um, that scene where they're talking about like the four modernizations and they're out on the street like talking about birth control or whatever. It's like those small details I think really get to the heart of like what was happening specifically in the Deng era, and Zhao was very aware of it. And I think that probably goes over the heads of a lot of people who watch this.
Right. Well, I mean, to kind of compare how these things are received, I remember in 2017 I saw
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a mainland film by Feng Xiaogang, called Youth. I don't know if you've seen this, but it's basically fucking platform. It's the same fucking shit. Like
Oh,
like
okay, yeah.
100%. It's about like a performance like troupe and like their transition over the cultural
Mm-hmm.
evolution and beyond. It's the same
Right.
fucking thing. And I watched that, and then I watched I watched this a number of years later, and I was like, oh, okay, like it's like I didn't know, like I was like, is this like a genre or whatever? But then I realized that like the youth film that I watched was like the most like glitzy, heavily like really really moralistic, didactic Spielbergian version of what platform is, and it was like really night and day where I saw like literally
Well,
the same subject, and it's like this is so much more of like a rich text than that.
to be real with you, guess because Feng Xiaogang is like, he's kind of in line with the Communist Party. Like he was a part of an art troupe when he was in high school or in college, I think. And
Oh,
then he was literally a part of the national committee of like it's called the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference. It's like an advisory body basically. So like I feel like if you're that like in deep with the government, you kind of have to be a bit more safe, let's say, than Jia is.
yeah. In terms of safeness, maybe we should talk about like what that means politically for his movies, just in
Mhm,
any
mhm.
era, but especially during this period where he was like very very independent. Uh, I don't know. I mean, there's some parts in A Touch of Sin where you're like, man, if this wasn't focused on like crime and violence, this would be it reminds me a lot of Giant Toe's Drug War, where I'm like, how the fuck did this get made? Like, what
Right.
censor approved this shit and was like, oh yeah, we're good? And like his towing with these, with the post 2004 like growing censorship, I feel like it's a situation where I feel like a guy like him can't really win, and it's such a difficult needle to thread
Right.
because if he's too abstract, then people are going to critique him of like, oh well,
He's
he's
not
not
grounded in the social reality or
well,
whatever,
also
yeah.
he's not making up my opinion for me.
Oh,
I think
yeah.
that's a
Yeah,
bigger
yeah,
deal
yeah.
for like a lot of critical discourse of oh well, he's not telling me what I should think, so
Yeah,
it's
he's
bad.
not telling me what I should think about China. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but whereas if I feel like if he goes too hard into it, like he'll just not get his shit released, and
Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah.
like I don't know, like it's
Well, we did
you
talk about how like like ever since the world he's always incorporated like elements of surrealism, or just something that's not dedicated to a kind of verisimilitude. Like, in
That's
still
right.
life, the building taking off as a rocket ship, or like in Mountains May Depart, like the plane crashing out of nowhere, or like the animated sequences in the world and stuff like that. I think he sort of played this interesting balance where it's like he is basically for most of the film like pretty strictly dedicated to depicting the social reality, but then just like to fend off like accusations of like, I don't know, shitting on the country, he like includes these small elements of like, oh, but this is actually a world where like weird shit happens too, haha.
You know what? For real, if that's like the idea of like using a shield of quirkiness as a
Yeah,
as a way to get away with past censorship, that's
yeah,
incredible.
yeah,
I think I think you're more correct about that. But also, I do like to believe though that he's genuinely more interested in like kind of like these bouts of like the weird
oh
like
no, he
these
totally is.
like
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
eruption of pure alienation
Hmm.
in the midst of all this like very very heart-wrenching drama. um
Yeah, especially like a touch of sin, like those scenes where Jiao Tao just goes ape shit and starts stabbing people. Like,
oh, that's just so good.
yeah, like those few moments are like he really bursts. I think are great. Yeah, no, I think beyond like concerns about censorship, I think they're genuine artistic decisions as well.
I think
Totally.
so too. I mean, listen, he like I massively respect anyone who just casually includes discussions about UFOs in his movies.
Yeah, yeah,
Like
and
that
like I
that
just
that
first
completely
like
has that 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 totally has my respect, and I wish everyone would do that. See, look at this though. This camera movement.
it's so good,
This,
and it just like the wall, the angles of it,
yeah, like
but also
that's a
the
fucking
blankness.
Antonioni thing. Like that's like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's like VD like rounding a building in no, not VD. Oh god, what's her name? Jean Reno.
Jean Moreau in
Yeah, yeah.
in Le Note, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, like her like rounding one of these like glass and steel skyscrapers, but like this too. Look at this, like where she goes behind, and then
Yeah.
like it's this early stuff with him is all about like blocking. It's just exquisite, like the best
Oh,
blocking
totally.
you'll
And
ever see.
framing. Yeah, yeah. No, I mean like, and I referenced it earlier, but I really like, and actually this is connected to Schrader's book, because for Schrader, like Schrader was basically like he wrote the Transcendental Cinema book like before, like in the 70s, like when he was a college student. And it was in 2018 when he revisited. And he was basically like, yeah, I wrote this book too early because like Tarkovsky and Deleuze were the vibe shift. Like that was where like Transcendental Cinema actually came into existence. And
Man, he was a prophet.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So like I now call myself like a Deleuze Tarkovsky, like a Deleuze Tarkovskyist, basically. I said my views on cinema. Like yeah, I mean Deleuze. I really love Deleuze's concept of the time image and applying it to slow cinema, because he sort of talks about like with Antonioni that these kind of shots, like the one we see with the wall, like the camera, like the characters are literally going off screen and we can't see them for periods of time, like as a blank canvas for time to unfold. Like still images or negative space is the canvas upon which the time image comes into existence, because as you said earlier actually, which I thought was very good, because there's no indication of like time passing, there's no real indication of like change or any sort of dynamism or anything. You're sort of just trapped in this meditative state where you have to really engage with and parse and really fall into this abyss of this still image. And I think this film does that really good, really well, basically.
I would also say too, it's let's be honest, it separates the wheat from the chaff. Either you're an
Yeah.
active participant in the movie or you're
Right.
not.
Yeah.
If
Exactly.
you can't be a passive participant in this, which I think movies with more hyperactive editing can like get accused of essentially rendering their viewers these placid like it's like you're watching like a commercial basically. There's
Right.
there's your eye just kind of glazes over. And I yeah, with like the qualities of slow cinema, i I do feel, I mean, I feel like it's really important to render time as a cinematic object. and you can like
Right. Oh,
I
totally.
think it can be accomplished pretty easily. Like I don't think you have to really go out of your way to
No.
like I think
I
most
think it's
people
embedded
have
within the medium itself, to be honest. Like,
I
that's
think
my
most people
view.
have an anxiety when it comes to filmmaking where it's like, oh, but is someone gonna, you know, like this is not like an unapproachable movie. You know, this is not like exceedingly,
Well,
you
depends who
know,
you ask, but
but I mean, like the subject matter is not like unapproachable. It's not like having,
oh,
you know,
true,
I've been
true,
watching
true.
like the like Eric Romero films recently, and you know, it's not like where oh, let's have a discourse about Pascal, and then you know, it's not that right. Like this is
Right.
you're watching people like live their lives and have a sense of space and like you know, like going to places over and over again, and I don't know, like you're not. Like well, what I'm trying to say is that I think it's a lot more approachable than people let it on to be. You know, like they'll watch Tarkovsky and be like, "Oh my god, this is the fucking, you know, this is the total crazy like you know Kino abyss." And it's like, no, man, no, man, he's very. I think this stuff is accessible. You just have to.
Yeah,
I really
yeah,
do think
yeah.
it's the exposure to it. If you can render yourself
Definitely.
exposed. I mean, like I just watched PTA's Heart Eight, and that's a
Uh-huh.
movie with a lot of like O Fools esque like long takes with camera movement, and it's you know like there's a lot of really long scenes in that, and you know people like that in PTA movies, they like that in Tarantino movies. And it's like no, this is the same thing. Like it's I the more I get into like you know world cinema and like you look at the alternate ways of like presenting things, there's really
Mhm.
you understand like no man the language is so inclusive that like you can't go out of your way to say like oh you know oh I just found it boring. It's like no man like develop a palette and if you
Yeah,
can't
literally
then you're
develop
a
a
pleb my
palette.
friend.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, I mean, it was this idea that like this forces a kind of active participation, I think is really fascinating. And this is where like I actually don't know if I agree with Schrader that like Ja is necessarily like pierced all the way into art gallery cinema versus film festival cinema. Because I read this really interesting article that was discussing like the difference of the long take in Andy Warhol versus the long take in like Antonioni. Whereas like Antonioni demands, like as you said, and I think with Ja as well, like a sort of active participation and attention. And you know there is something I guess like to jokingly use the word authoritarian on the director's part about demanding your attention. But whereas Andy Warhol, who's like you know obviously a visual artist, he sort of allows you to just like fuck around and chill during his like exorbitantly long films, where the film is more a space for you to just hang out as opposed to like an artistic vision that's being imposed upon you. And I think Ja is closer to the Antonioni approach than he is to the Warhol approach in that regard. But I also will say, like, there's an interesting chasm, not really chasm, but a split created between the audience and the actors. Because while the audience, I think, is sort of forced to be active participants in this sort of artistic vision, the actors actually have a lot more freedom with the long take. And I think Ja has said in interviews like actually like he only does like 3 or 4 takes for each scene, or sometimes even just one take, and he only rehearses on set. He doesn't even do much preparation in that regard.
Oh
And
hell
like
yeah.
actors are allowed to like do whatever movements they want or say whatever lines they want as long as they sort of get to the point of the scene basically, you know? So
Yeah,
while
yeah.
we as the audience are like sort of forced to undergo this process, the actors actually have a lot more freedom, which I think is great, you know?
Yeah, which I think you know is I think it shows. I think these movies they aren't too stressed about performance. I think you can
Right.
tell like the actors are like there's a sense of you know them just being like very relaxed and pared down in regards to you know who their characters are. You know, it's
Hmm.
I doubt that like they're too much of a step away from who these people like really are because they're not going out of their way to impose like okay recognize my ticks and all this. No, it's not
Right,
happening.
yeah.
You know what though, you you bringing up the shortness of the takes and like the you know like just get to the point of the scene. Man, I'll tell you, the fucking I'm more and more respecting that approach because
Yeah.
we love our Kubricks and the other anal retentive guys like Michael Mann who just it's like all right 40 takes before we can
Yeah,
go to
yeah,
lunch
yeah,
like
yeah.
that's cool and like I get it but also I feel I don't know there's a spontaneity that is also achieved with a shortness and a directness of just capturing these moments and just just being lucid and just being like all right we'll just I trust you at a point to understand this right and if you don't then we'll just do it a couple more times and we'll likely get it right there's
Hmm.
and because Jia Zhangke like works with a lot of the same people over and over again you
Hmm.
feel like there's like a company trust, right? It's like, okay, these are my people. Like
Right.
I know what to expect. We know what to do. We're just gonna knock it out. Okay, this part with him putting the glass on the wall.
Yeah.
There's,
Oh,
uh,
this is classic China. This
does
is
this
classic
really
China.
happen? Oh my god.
Oh my god. Oh, literally everywhere. No, I'm not kidding. Like, if like to defend like your property or whatever, or just like to stop people from climbing in, you this is literally what people do in China. Like, I could go to if I flew back to Beijing and like went to the old hutongs, like I could find you like 10 of these in a second. Like,
Nothing but glass walls. Yeah, I gotta say, I would not want to be around those.
oh yeah, you don't fuck around with those. It works. I mean,
Look at this. Look at this. Come on. Look at this. Is it just like the most elemental use of shadow and
uh
architecture and
huh.
in places that we've already seen before, but just framed in an entirely different way.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it used to be from like the diagonal, now it's like straight on, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, well, there's like a real flatness achieved with some of these shots that I like, but then also some of it, like he'll move the camera slightly and then it'll render into a three-dimensional space, and like he'll kind of like that shot we were talking about earlier with where they were going in and out of the wall. That has like a very like 3D quality to it, because
Right.
like the wall is so close to the camera and the performers are farther away where like everything just feels like there's an imminent sense of geography being displayed and so like it really draws your eye in an active way.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, sorry, we're not made for each other. I have to marry the director.
I mean, speaking of long-term collaborations and a kind of artistic
Yeah, well let's
compatibility, like
you,
Jia
you
Zhangke
know
Zhao Tao is like one of the ultimate examples.
okay Evelyn, we need to create like a list of wife guy cinema. We need to create this. It's him. It's it's Ja. It's Paul W. S. Anderson, and
Oh,
it's
it's no John Cassavetes with Gina Rollins. Like that's another classic example.
there's another one. There's another one. I forget what I'm talking about. Oh, you know what? Clint Eastwood had a lot. He made a lot of films with Sandra Locke,
Uh-huh.
even though they divorced. And oh shit,
What
there's
about Lynch and Isabella Rossellini? I guess that was like one film, but you know.
yeah, that doesn't count. That doesn't count.
Yeah, yeah, never mind.
No, but there's another one that I'm forgetting. Um, I might remember it later. But we just love to fucking see like there's something like really kind of lovely and quaint about it that I enjoy. Just
Yeah,
like
yeah,
having
yeah.
having two partners just being like, all right, let's just make great art. Can we just do that? And you're like,
Yeah,
yes, thank
yeah.
you. See, I love
Also
it.
like
Later in the shot, it's like we don't
uh-huh.
find out until later that this is the part that we earlier saw them at. I love that.
Yeah, exactly. No, the reveal is so good. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And like that, like it doesn't announce itself. It's just really subtle and tactful. But also like it's
Hmm.
closer now, right? Like we're in more of it and we can see like the dirt and the debris everywhere.
Right. Yeah, no, this film is like the opposite of melodramatic. There's really nothing. Like these, these both like like moments of personal change or like even just broader socio-political change, like the film sort of announces it in a very subtle and held back way. It's like, as I was talking about earlier, I think probably from the perspective of someone living contemporaneously with these changes, it sort of just feels like, oh, I guess that's happening, and only in hindsight does it seem like, oh wow, that was actually like a huge world historical transformation.
Yeah, yeah, and I think you were talking about like the time image, and I haven't read that fucking Deleuze book or any other Deleuze books, but
Well, I
just from
tried.
like
I haven't really read it either. I just know the concept.
a couple of suits talking about movies, just as it
Hell
should be.
yeah. Well, Schrader gives a good summary of it, so I'm not totally guilty.
Oh well, Schrader explained it to me, so that's
Yeah,
good enough.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, sorry, what were we gonna say though? I cut you off.
What was I gonna say? Oh yeah, yeah, you were talking about the like the non like drawing attention to itself of that,
Uh-huh.
and like the fact that this is not melodramatic, right? That there he's just like, nope, we're not good for each other, and then like just leaves, right? And
Uh-huh.
I love that in movies when like you just
Yeah,
have
yeah, yeah.
like two characters who are entirely aware of the situation and just like kind of just work through it, and like there's not this like I'm upset and da da da, like nothing like super contrived or theatrical. Um,
Right, right.
can any of his films be qualified as melodramatic? Do you think?
Mhm.
I feel like Mountains May Depart has some of this. There's a little bit of it, especially the first part where
Yeah, oh,
it's
big
that it's
time,
that it's
yeah.
that three-way relationship
Yeah.
that is like that stuff is very deliberately schmaltzy in a way that like I think a lot of people got irritated by it, but it makes a lot more sense when you watch the rest of the movie.
Uh-huh, yeah. No, I mean, Mountains May Depart's an interesting example because that was the film where I think Zhao Tao's character, her father dies, and there's this really beautiful scene where all the monks surround him, and she's just like fucking like crying. Like that's like one of the most like emotionally charged scenes in his entire filmography, you know?
Yeah, I think he gets more comfortable with emotion as it goes along, or at least like more interested in like subjective expressions of emotion. Like look at this though.
Right.
Like this scene is like antithesis of what we're talking about. Like
Yeah, yeah,
this is
yeah.
so pared back and quiet and um, simmering. Like he
Yeah,
spells more
yeah.
with implication here, and yeah, just also I know why you like this film also because it's nothing but like these kids just fucking like singing and smoking.
And chilling, yeah. Well, it's that sense, like, once the great proletarian culture revolution is gone, and like, I mean, yeah, actually, I should talk about this. I mean, this is an important period of history because it was also a great depoliticization of like the entire population, but especially the youth. As I was saying earlier, like Deng Xiaoping revoking the right to strike and the right to assemble and the right to hold big debates and write big character posters, and sort of just annihilating any semblance of like the freedom of speech that was offered by Mao during the Cultural Revolution was just gone. And this, Deng's whole thing of like, oh, if you need to get rich first, to get rich is glorious, start a small business and don't worry about anything else. I think that sort of unmoored a lot of the radical youth who obviously like were heavily mobilized during the Cultural Revolution. And I think some of the sort of stillness and the sense of just uh stagnation emerges from that depoliticization.
Right. Yeah, man, these big sweeping camera movements, they're
Uh-huh.
I mean, really, I mean, over the course of uh his cinema, I mean, really, I doubt that anyone has documented Feng Yang more than he has.
Oh yeah, no, I mean if you literally
I mean,
search for
I mean,
the
it's a cliche, but it really does become a character.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, totally. And it's like as Ja himself would probably like to say, and I agree with him because having been to like small towns on the offskirts of Beijing, or even certain places in like Hebei province and stuff like that. There is a dimension to this that can be universalized, and again, looking within the particular for the universal, basically. And as I've said in the past with Ozu's films, um, by digging deeper actually into the specificities of a certain location, you actually do a better job of finding those universal implications.
Yeah, definitely. Oh man, him taking a ride on the back of that truck makes me
Yeah,
think
no.
about like when did like the first skateboards get popularized in the mainland? Because that would
Oh, I have
I
no idea actually.
I want to see that movie about these people like inventing like it's like all
I
right,
I'll
new
be
Chinese
honest.
skate tricks.
I think bike culture was never really supplanted. I think bike culture remains the monopoly in
Bikes are
China.
strong.
The bikes are
Yeah,
strong indeed, yeah. But I will say, like, I do love like those brief moments, and like, is this similar to Ozu's like pillow shots, where he has just these like shots that act as like a crossover between two separate scenes of just like someone doing something, and it's like just chilling. It's like totally chill, or it's just like an everyday thing, or it's like a little small moment of fun. Like I love that those breaks from the narrative, basically. Not that this is a terribly narrative oriented film, but like just like he's even more dedicated to just oh this is like a part of life, and that's that. Anyways, back to the story. Like I love that.
yeah, yeah. He's I mean at this point he's so interested in capturing verisimilitude and texture and I don't know. Yeah. Oh man, like this part where he's talking about uh, privatization, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The
it's
privatization of the performance troupe, and yeah,
yeah.
that's
I like this
yeah,
idea though of this transition of like the arts from being like a public cultural institution to being like okay
a
now it's your
business,
thing now your thing and you're exploiting yourself and
right?
you're
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
like essentially like you have to take this public art and make it a private good and like that whole dynamic like speaks a lot to me and I think he's come back and back to the topic of performance theater in his works and dance and I don't know you wonder like the idea of theater and dance as this oscillation between like the personal private spheres and like the public and like what does that mean to politicize your own individual expression or your collective expression, right? Like
Right,
which part of this is enabled by the system, which part is um considered like basically irrelevant or like unpractical.
right, exactly.
Yeah, you were speaking about the music thing earlier and this is a great example of that.
Yeah, literally celebrating Deng Xiaoping. Yeah, and it seems like it's a non-diegetic sound, unless I'm missing something.
I don't remember if it is. It might be. Um, the oh yeah, okay. I think
Yeah, yeah,
you're right.
yeah. No, because I just remember like around the similar time that this was released, like the great documentary West of the Tracks by Wang Bing about Shenyang in Liaoning province, where my mom is actually originally from. There's another scene in that film as well where it's like the overhead announcement of like the party is sort of done in a non-diegetic way, and I don't want to lean too much into like the anti-communist talking point of all the evil, all 1984 party looking over us, but there this sense that like um ironically, even with like economic and to an extent cultural liberalization, the dominance of the Communist Party in China did not go away at all. If anything, it might have solidified.
it calcified as far as I understand it.
Yeah, and it just got more concentrated. Like, at least during the Mao era, and like, I'm not gonna paint like Mao as like some
Your
great
wife is a
anarchist or
Thatcher.
anything.
I forgot about that.
No, that's a great line. No, but like, I'm not gonna paint Mao as like some anarchist or whatever. But like, the decentralized nature of at least the first 3 years of the Cultural Revolution probably offered like the greatest level of freedom politically in modern Chinese history, and that was just all gone by this point. So
Yeah, well, it's like them having like a fucking business meeting here, talking very
I know.
solemnly, and
Yeah, it's an interesting inversion from like during the Mao period, what kind of meetings they would be having versus now. It's like they're talking like businessmen, you know.
See, I love this though. He's like, he's like, why are you trying to sell us off? And he's like, I'm selling myself.
Yeah,
First
yeah,
of all, like,
exactly.
there's such a pragmatic like ruthlessness to it, and
But also kind
yeah,
of self-awareness because like you know the de-collectivization of rural areas and the destruction of the iron rice bowl and you know just a basic sense of economic security, it definitely forced a lot of people to migrate. So in that sense, like you did have to sell yourself quite literally, and I think they were sort of experiencing the same process, you know. I also want to add like this, you know, the performance troupe as just like a social phenomenon in China. It's interesting how this like concept of traveling around the country has been sort of inverted. Because during the Cultural Revolution, and I think you know Han Dongping talks about this in his book, The Unknown Cultural Revolution, traveling was actually used as an opportunity by youth and like red guards to experience the country, to learn from like workers and peasants all around the country, and
oh
it's sort of seen as like this positive like socialist building project basically. But where you ultimately would return to your hometown to impart the knowledge that you gained from traveling. But in like the Deng era, it you know this kind of traveling just became like, oh, I need to get the fuck out of here. Like I need to become like a big city person, or I need to become like a Westerner. You know.
yeah, yeah, literally anywhere else, but in a place like Fenyang.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that reversal, I think, is also another dimension of it too. But I mean, it's some of it was like very self-driven. Like obviously, people wanted to get out, but also it was out of necessity. It's like, I mean, my area has been decollectivized or deindustrialized. There's literally nothing for me to do. I have to escape to like the big cities where you know Western capital is flowing in for the first time. You know.
Yeah, well, not even that, but like just the idea of it's like with that now you can be like, oh well, now there's all these new things that I can interpret, and basically, if you're a part of an artistic unit, then that can become, like that's a vital resource, right? Like you need to keep up with trends, and there's this whole thing of like now you're into this economic cycle.
Right. Yeah, and I guess another dimension to it, and I mean, some of the scenes that just happened, I think, get to it. Like the gender politics of this film, I think, are sort of overlooked. Um, and like you know, the history of you know, obviously the main narrative, and I think it's true. Obviously, is communist China did probably the most for women in China of any throughout its entire history. You know, reversing thousands of years of an extremely patriarchal society. But I do think it's interesting too that like the influence of Western consumerism and cultural norms, as well as the you know increasing privatization of the economy and growing consumerism, has sort of reintroduced um, certain you know a kind of like pressure on women to conform to a certain image, I guess, as
Yeah, well,
opposed
there was that
yeah,
scene earlier where they were talking about makeup,
and like
and
getting their hair done, yeah.
yeah, not that like I think it's ludicrous for us to like paint that as like some kind of like
Oh,
inherently
there's nothing
reactionary
wrong
or
with it.
whatever.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
but I think like the way that it's framed in terms of like a keeping up with the Joneses esque quality.
Right.
Yeah, I could definitely see what you're talking about there. And it's interesting because you had places like Hong Kong, which were so far down that path that
Oh well,
like
yeah, because
when
yeah,
it came to like 97, they were like, oh my God, like, it was like this apocalyptic scenario where they were, so, like precious about like what does individuality mean? What does Hong Kong mean? Like, what is this identity? It,
right.
yeah, you had all these different networks of these various influences colliding.
Yeah, and like actually, it's interesting you bring up Hong Kong because Zhang Jun, the other character in the film, he has an aunt in Canton, and you know he's throughout the course of the film so far, he's visited multiple times, and you know, Canton really was like this window into Hong Kong, which obviously was like a capitalist colony of a Western power, and and it was also one of the special economic zones that you know, as I said earlier, gained access to Western capital and obviously that cultural influence. Okay, but this scene is so great. Like You're with your buddies on the donkey, like singing. Like, come on, you know.
Hell yeah.
That's that real rural China vibes, you know.
Yeah, see, this is like the fucking like opening bit of like Sternberg's Morocco, where he's just like
Oh
drawing
yeah,
straight out into this derelict town, and just like letting uh the camera like see all these various figures come and like start moving past them. And
having all the people right in the back of the truck is so classic too.
oh yeah, yeah. Well, they were all in that bus before, and yeah,
Right.
it's and then like later we see them kind of like like abandoned on the side of the road, and it's like very hopeless.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Actually,
because
that's
we're
something
about
too.
halfway through, and like it
Right.
is like at this like critical halfway part. I mean, the film is like structured in a very like easygoing way where like you kind of can feel exactly where you're at in the narrative, and so it's at this part where they're like, all right, now they're moving out of the town and going on the road to chase privatization.
Yeah, but I mean, and I talked about this with our once again our aborted Millennium Mambo commentary.
We'll do it again someday,
Uh,
God willing.
uh, like this concept of like the broken teleology of art house cinema, and especially slow cinema. You know, I think like the reversal of Mao's socialist path you could read as a kind of like a dispelling of the notion that like the development of communism just happens on this linear path. It absolutely does not, obviously. And I mean, any serious Marxist would know that anyway. But, you know, I think this idea of like China sort of going on a very clear path for a good chunk of the 20th century, and then that, in my mind at least, being reversed or being totally disregarded, I think has put people in this really strange historical moment where a sense of like a fixed teleology of how history is supposed to operate, or like what the sort of national project you're a part of in a broader sense has sort of been destroyed, you know. I think that sort of works perfectly with the narrative structure where, you know, people are just sort of moping about for most of the film, you know, maybe, you know, fighting about this, fighting about that, and really the only narrative trend is like the privatization of the performance
Yeah,
troupe.
well, the
And
narrative
like,
trend is like explicitly a
yeah,
political one.
yeah, exactly. And like it's I think it's a great narrative structure that reflects, I think, the attitude of China, which is like, you know, the characters themselves and like beyond that core narrative, the skeleton of like privatization or whatever, there is this like sense that everything is just sort of nothing almost, and there's no clear sense forward basically. And so I think in that sense, like the experience of watching this film perfectly captures the experience of just living through that period, you know?
Ah, yes, introduction of the great Sandman. Who
Yes, yes,
I
Sammy.
man, I know that him and Ja are buddies, and I do wonder if like these roles that he has in all his movies are like a private joke between the two.
Yeah, oh no, totally. I could see that. I mean, you know, as someone who's worked on independent films, like you have those kinds of things where it's like you work with the same people and you develop a sort of a rapport
But the thing is, he always
Austrian.
plays like a very dim-witted guy, and I'm
No,
always like, oh,
that's what I mean, you know, like
like I doubt he's that way in real life. Like I don't.
oh no. But it's just like, you know, they did it once. It's like, oh, like, you know, what, do you want to do it again? Like,
Yeah, keep doing it.
but yeah, I mean, Sam Meek's character is always also kind of tragic in a way, you know.
Well, that's the thing. He's like in still life. It's like fucking horrible.
No,
You're
yeah.
just ugh.
Yeah, like, you know, reading about as I I DM'd you before we were gonna watch this film, like I was rereading some of the literature that I have on this period, and like Maurice Meisner in his very famous book Mouse China and After, where he goes into the history of this period, this whole period, he talks about like, you know, one of the big victims of decollectivization was just like people without political connections, people who weren't always necessarily the most entrepreneurial or intelligent or didn't have much of an education,
Yeah,
or
it's like
people
now
who
you're
weren't the most
fucked.
physically strong. Yeah, it's like, you know, it's like you would imagine like a genuine socialist society would care about these people first. But no, I mean, Deng basically just gave way for like local party cadres and like bureaucrats to monopolize control over things in local areas, and have people like Han San Ming like got fucked over.
Yeah, and like Jia then like really portrays that in such a visceral way. And I think the
Hmm.
first part of Touch of Sun, I'm
Right,
pretty sure
right,
it's the
yeah.
first portion.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah,
That part pisses me off so much. Fucking in a good way. Like it's such a when he shoots at that guy, I'm like, yes, God, Jesus, like it's so
yeah.
frustrating. Yeah, the relationship that John Sam Ming have, I can't help but compare it to like Johnny Toe and Lam Suet, who
Oh, yeah, yeah,
like every fucking movie, his name is like Fatso or Fatty or like you know,
yeah.
and like you got to think like okay, like these guys, like this is their thing, right? Like because otherwise you wouldn't like all right, time to be in a new Johnny Toe movie. What's my character's name? Oh, for the 37th time, it's
It's like
Fatty. Okay,
fatty.
it's weird though because like he wasn't even that fat for the first couple like Johnny Toe movies that he was in. Like he wasn't like huge or anything. Like, but he, like,
Right.
they still called him Fatty. I'm like, okay. Look at the layers of architecture here. Look at like
It's so great.
like
Yeah.
the capturing the buildings kind of stacked on top of each other in this like quasi photoshopped way where it's hard to even discern like the geography of the place, and just using that with like again like a fixed but still like turning camera. And he's gotten like over the course of the movie, like now the camera does these really subtle little gestures. He's like really like, but it's not like subjective though. Like he's not really following the characters so much as just like half trailing ahead of
Mm.
them or behind them.
Right.
And yeah, I like the way he portrays the passing of the seasons in this. It's really effective. Like you got to think for like like a film that's like that probably doesn't have a huge budget or whatever, and it's like being done in kind of a maverick, independent way without the
Right.
approval of the mainland government or the censorship board. It's like I don't know. He does a lot. Like this movie, like again, like you said, it's a true epic, but like you can hardly imagine like the construction of it is it's so elemental and is so like controlled, and you're like, man, this is this guy's fucking like second movie. Like how could this happen?
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, that just shows you the importance of great craft, as a filmmaker, more than
Yeah.
anything, really. Yeah.
Well, he just has the rigor down pat, right? Like there's no really element here that's out of place. Although
Right.
I got to say though, I do enjoy later in his career how he couples his naturalism a lot more with like spaces that don't feel um, so desolate as a lot of these do.
Right.
Uh, like sometimes in this movie, like you get it is like that Antonioni feeling where you feel like there's like two people in an entire city, or and like not that that's
Yeah.
bad,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it's just an interesting choice that he chooses to like contrast these like this scene, right? This very naturalistic, crowded performance scene with more other ones where it's like this huge canvas, but like there'll be only two people inside of it, and he just alternates back and forth.
Hmm. Always defend the party. Always defend the central committee. That's yeah. I mean, that's just classic because like Deng basically proposed. Um, God, Meisner said it somewhere, but like he had like three principles basically that Deng put in place, and like one of them was just the defense of the Communist Party, and I think the other one was like we'll preserve Mao Zedong thought, and then I forgot what the third one was. But basically, the other two totally went away, and the only one that retained was like you must always uphold the Communist Party. So nice to see that
Yeah,
unfold. But
interesting,
I
interesting.
mean, yeah. To speak of the form, like oh god, the lighting is so great. Like I love this is like this is burned into my mind like being in places like this in China, the contrast between the beautiful blue of the night sky but then like the sharp, like oversaturated, overexposed, like yellowish color of the light bulb, you know?
Yeah, I
Like,
want to talk to you
yeah.
about this night sky in particular. Okay. So, like, what do you feel texturally is different between these first two movies of his, which were, done on film, obviously, and then
Yeah.
and then him just going straight into digital, like, and like early kind of shitty digital too, because this definitely feels a lot different, uh, in terms of, like, the lighting and what you were, just discussing with, like, the night sky. Like, there's really nothing like that happens in any of his other movies, and I feel, like, what can we say about him? Because you could just say, like, oh, moving digital, it's like it's a of ease thing, and like, even sure, even with the, like, the technical details and the difficulties that it presented at, in those, like, early 2000 stages.
Uh-huh.
But I don't know, like, do you feel like, is this aesthetic, like, would you want to see Ja return to, like, using, 35 or whatever this was shot on? Like, do you feel that
I
he,
actually
like, lost something with
I'll
this, or do you prefer this?
I'll be honest, I actually don't know if he's shooting on 35. I actually thought this was digital.
No, 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 this is not. Yeah,
Oh, this
that's
is not? Okay.
no. Unknown Pleasures was his first digital.
Oh no, yeah, I mixed it up. Sorry, yeah, Unknown Pleasures was his first one. Okay, yeah, yeah. Sorry, I got it mixed up. I was like, I knew one of the earlier films was actually his first on digital. No, you're right. This was still on 35 millimeter. Yeah, I mean, I would love him for him to return to it, honestly, personally, because I mean, I do like his later films, but there is something about. Although, actually, I don't know. I feel like return is an interesting concept because I feel like this film really belongs to its time period of like the early 2000s, like re-examination of the 80s and the 90s. I don't know if it would even make sense for him to return to it if I'm being frank, you know?
Yeah, I think it would
So,
be like a purely aesthetic gesture. Not that, like,
yeah,
that makes it unimportant, but, like, I don't think.
yeah,
I think it would be just a total choice of, like, affecting, you know, like, something he would want to do with lighting, or, like, making some kind of, like, statement with that by itself.
right.
But yeah, sometimes I think about this in regards to, like, my guy Michael Mann, where he originally planned on shooting Public Enemies on film,
Yeah.
and then he started doing, like, experiments and being like, oh, but what if we actually did, like, a period piece movie with, the hyper real, like, digital clarity, the smoothing of the image out, and making it feel like this
Hmm.
documentary when they're firing machine guns. And um I and, like, a lot of people, I think, when they come to certain filmmakers, it's like there's David Fincher, pre-digital, and there's post-digital, right? Like, there's, like, a really distinct difference, like him, Michael Mann, David Lynch, right? Like, there's a sense that, like, something is both gained and lost in that transition. And there's so many, like, classic great filmmakers that we love that went through that when Ja really, he hit it on so early that it's kind of, in a certain sense, like, when I watch this, I feel like the robustness of the image, and with the lighting, and the
Right.
the the starkness that is achieved with it is something.
And also the texture for me is really another thing.
Yeah, well, this is like, I mean, this film really is like, it's got a grimy quality that the others definitely don't. I mean, even
Right.
even Unknown Pleasures looks pretty slick. Like, it just,
Yeah,
it
compared
has
to
some
this.
artifacting, but like, this is, like, there's some parts of this that resemble,
Mhm.
like, Italian films in the 60s and 70s, just how much grit is on screen. And
Right.
yeah, it's like, I mean,
Well,
like
it's
I
definitely
said
within
earlier,
that tradition.
to the
Yeah.
point where, like, you can't even see people's faces sometimes. Where,
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah, and, like, I respect that, that aesthetic on its own, thing,
Mhm.
right? And you're wondering, like, well, is someone, like, when they go back to that, is that a regression, or is that, like, a distinct choice? And I don't know, because you don't see it a lot, because that's why, like, when I was talking about Michael Mann, it seemed like an interesting idea, even though he didn't do it. Was, he was already fully into his digital thing at the time, but the fact that he was considering it, right? But now
Mm.
it seems like impossible that he would ever really do that. And I'm thinking of like, yeah, what are filmmakers who have done something like that where they mix it up? Because it's hard to consider. Because either they're, fully like, oh no, I just do digital, that's my thing, or they are like, retrograde guys like Nolan and Tarantino,
Or PTA, yeah.
where it's like, yeah, like, oh, this is, only this because this is what I consider true real film, and other such bullshit. And yeah, I don't know. I doubt that Shah even considers it probably as much as that. And it might just be more of like, this is like a standard that works, and it's just how I want things to be. It's like what I'm comfortable with. But yeah, because you just look at this, and this is, I would say, probably his most acclaimed movie, and it's so different from the rest of his stuff that like, I think when people would watch this, it's kind of a deception when it's like, oh yeah, go to the world, and you're like, nah, man, when you're in the world, it really, really different, really much more soft and much more like, I don't want to say approachable, but like there's less like, it's a less confrontational image than like this is. Like this, when you see a landscape, it's like, all right, shapes, like everything's formulated in very
Yeah, there's
explicit
very
terms.
angular. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I guess touching upon that grittiness that you're talking about, obviously this film is in the tradition of the Italian neorealist uh, tradition, which is actually where Deleuze locates the emergence of the time image in the post World War II era of cinema. But like that's the scene of Han San-mi basically like selling his life to the mining company is so disheartening to me. And I know we've talked about how Jia doesn't really take sides or isn't a terribly like didactic filmmaker, but I mean that scene to me is like extremely explicit about its politics or about what it's implying. Like, and it's so ironic, like in the contract, that one line that was like, in accordance with revolutionary humanism, we will pay your family like 500 RMB if you fucking die. It's like, oh, great,
Yeah, wonderful.
but we won't take responsibility for it anyway. And like the fact that he can't read and he had to, people had to sign with like their fingerprints because they couldn't really write properly. Like, when I see that shit, I'm like, damn, would
No,
another
it,
10
it
years of Maoism have saved them?
yeah, I know. It fucking pisses me off,
It's
dude.
like it's like who raised the literacy rate in the country? Oh right, it was Mao. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. This shot
Yeah.
though, this feels
Uh,
like it's
yeah.
from a fucking western or something. It's so bleak,
Yeah, right. Yeah.
so stark. Like
The landscape and the wide shot of it. Yeah.
I really enjoy it. Like, I mean, just
And there's trees and everything. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah, he and we talked about his like kinship with Ho Xiaoshin, and I think, yeah, you know with with Ho Xiao, sorry, with Ho Xiao, blech, ugh, I need to drink fucking water. With Ho Xiaoshin, I think, like, when he, okay, like this shot is perfect, right?
Right.
Like, for me, Ho's worlds are like, Ho conceives of things as like, not as like paintings, but as like him essentially trying to like collapse a series of contrasts into something that is like as impactful as possible, so that he can then rest on it and let you kind of sit with it, like you said, decipher it in a meditative quality.
Uh-huh.
Whereas this, what Ja does, he's a bit more sprawling. He likes I think the more painterly sides of it, that, or like, I because I never get the sense that Oh Shen is like going out of his way to, like Flowers of Shanghai isn't like a painterly movie, right? Like,
Right.
when he does these long takes, or wide shots, it's a little bit more like, I would say, rigorous and considered. Whereas Jai, I feel like there's a plasticity and a flexibility to this, where, like this, right? Like, where the mountaintops are just out of focus. Right? This would never happen in a Hoshoshino.
Yeah,
This would
yeah.
never happen. But in here, he's like, okay, like let's just do it, right? Like now
Also,
we have this.
he just broke the 180-degree rule.
Oh yeah, yeah, totally. Fuck it.
Yeah, he's like, fuck it. I mean, fuck that rule, anyways. He's like, yeah, we could jump on the other side of the angle. Like, people are not stupid; they'll know where
Well,
we are.
it's not like you're confused either. Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, just hanging out in the middle of nowhere with your buddies in a truck. So great. I love this scene. Like,
Yeah, this part is great.
again, like again, the train, the idea of like waiting on the platform, which is a pretty I think it's in the film, but like the song of like, waiting on the platform for something to come. Yeah, yeah, actually it's right here. Yeah, yeah. Oh, this is so great. Just like the train in the desolate landscape.
Yeah, this is what I'm talking about too, because it's hard to tell like where one mountaintop begins, the other ends.
Right. And talk about layers and textures. I mean,
Oh yeah. I mean, he doesn't. I don't think he gets considered as like uh someone who's like really like too studious about this, because I think a lot of the examination of him goes more along the like, all right, like what's the explicit like political subjects being depicted. But I mean, look at this, right? He's a master of just where's the fucking horizon, right? Like
Right.
you're never really confused, nothing's ever fucking muddy. And yeah, I don't know, I just like it sounds stupid when I say these kind of things, but I really do respect like filmmakers who achieve a consistency of vision without
Right.
like really ever having to feel compromised on like what they want to achieve. And like they just have like their toolkit, right, and they just apply it and it just works in any situation, right? It's
Uh-huh.
like there's no kind of story that like a Kurosawa like couldn't tell, right? Like his style could just go along with anything because it wasn't so hyper specified. And I do like filmmakers who kind of like find a niche, but you look at Jean, you're like, oh, you look at all the stories he's told. I mean, his stuff is malleable. He can basically do anything. I like if you fucking like when I was first getting into him, I remember I got to like a touch of sin, and like if someone told me that the guy who made the world was gonna make like a quasi Tarantino like crime movie, I'd be like, get the fuck out of here. But he did it, he totally did it. And I like
Right.
that's why I get upset when because I was reading too these critical examinations of him, and they were all
Mhm.
just like a bunch of horseshit. It was people talking out their ass, and I'm like, no, man, just watch the movies and you'll see like this guy is he's just incredibly confident and he's got this stuff locked down, and he's not. I don't think he's can be reduced to these simplistic critical objects. And of course, I mean, look at this. Like, come on, like this is. I don't even know how to describe this. Like,
No, it's perfect. I mean, framed off, like totally off center, all the way to the right. Again, the contrast between the fire and the blue mountains. It's perfect.
and the mountains are so like different shades of blue. It's like a color
Right.
palette.
Yeah, literally. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, as the further back you go, the lighter it gets, the more distant it gets. Yeah. But
Yeah,
I also wanted to touch upon that brief scene, like right after they were chasing the train, and the film sort of lingers on them looking at the plane. I mean, the train, not plane, the train sort of going past, and I that moment always sort of strikes me because it's normally like a filmmaker would just cut immediately. Okay, you get the point. Like they followed a train, but that sense of I think a genuine like wonder, a desire to leave, and maybe a reclamation of like some of the hope during the Cultural Revolution of the youth traveling by train as well, particularly by freight train. I think that brief moment saw that energy sort of coming back a little bit, and otherwise what is seems like such a desolate and hopeless landscape.
yeah, and I think I think I actually mentioned this in the Mambo commentary as well, but y- you know particularly with like architects of what you've called slow cinema, but I think just with any great director,
Uh-huh.
it's knowing what is like it's first knowing what is necessary to tell your story, but then also knowing like what is the necessity of unnecessary parts, like you've described, where it's a little bit, it lingers a little bit too long, where you start to like think about things in the space of the amount of time that that image takes to like render itself to your eyes. And
Mhm.
so like because of the length of it, you start to get ideas, right? Like it
Right.
uses it uses inefficiency to illustrate storytelling, and it that's like I think that to me is like a thing that you only really get if you're an artist. Like
Yes.
people who just make straight up mechanical, like mechanistic, um, stories where it's okay, the bare minimum, exactly what you mean. Like that's fine, and like I respect a lot of people who do that, but like that's what separates a fucking craftsman from a genius, right? Like his choice to like linger on that, that's an artist's choice. Like that's a choice that a fucking artist
100%.
makes. And
That's the auteur choice, you know?
yeah, absolutely. It's like why this and not that, and it's like the choices that get made there are what separate the platforms from that film I was talking about earlier, where
Mm.
that was like a real schmaltzy conventional way of telling the story, and this is more of like a completely unique, interesting way that really lingers with you after you've seen it.
Right.
And I just love this, like her with this like sequin green dress,
And the comb, yeah.
and like everything else contrasts against that.
Right. Yeah, it's, the rundown walls, the sort of the old television, like, the old bed frames, everything, yeah. Just hangs up. I don't wanna deal with that shit.
Yeah, man, his. I remember when I first watched this film, I got irritated by his performance, but then I realized like, no, he's actually good. He just plays like a shithead character,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
like how ways like he doesn't really do this in any of the other I was about to say Antonio, any of the other Jia Zhangke movies, but this
Mhm.
one, like, I don't know, I just love the way he embodies this like really fucking angsty up his own ass guy. But he's not like, again, he doesn't like vocalize angst. Like just his posture tells so much.
Right. Oh boy, getting in trouble for delinquency from the Chinese police. Yeah, this is actually a really interesting scene too. Like the idea that like you can't sleep together because you're an illegitimate couple, and like the sexual moralities of the time. Um, there it was very arbitrary. Like I read a little bit about this, but like like one moment, oh, this is not allowed, but then the other moment, like, oh, we're openly promoting like birth control. So
Yeah,
it's like what position do we take really? And I
I,
think a
I,
lot of
I
people, yeah.
oh sorry, I just want to say I love this motherfucker like waltzing
Yeah, he's
between
just
the
eating.
scenes with his food.
No,
It's so good.
and it's great that the camera follows him to go between the two spaces. But I mean, that meal looks kind of fire. Like he's got the
Oh my
mantou like
god,
on front of it.
looks
Like
delicious. I would eat the hell out of
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's yeah, I mean the regulation of like sexual politics in China, I think has its own very like complicated fluctuating history. So
Yeah, if
it's
I'm gonna be
yeah.
honest, I couldn't tell you shit about that because like that seems like such a dense topic to me. Because I don't even know like because you were talking about like the history of like patriarchy in China and like
Right.
but for me like I don't even know how that differed if any from like the way that it was expressed in the West or even like Japan or Korea or it's hard to because I feel like it's so easy to like really uh objectify those kind of things into being like oh this is an essentialist like aspect of
Right.
so and so's
Oh
culture but like
yeah.
but for me that's like that's as dumb as saying like
No, it's
that
really dumb.
that like drinking alcohol is European culture or some bullshit, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Speaking of drinking alcohol,
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's certainly a big part of Chinese culture.
hell yeah.
Getting absolutely shit faced is totally acceptable, even in like an official capacity.
I'm always
But
reminded of that the infamous Misato gif,
oh
which
yeah,
which to
yeah.
me is like the
So
apex
true.
of alcoholism.
I'll have to
Not even on
control
film,
myself.
just in anywhere.
I'll have to control myself when you mention Misato. I know I'm being recorded right now, so.
Oh no no yeah down girl down. Yeah,
Yeah,
see
but
look
I
at
will.
this part with the neon lights, so good.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's great. Oh yeah, just like the whole atmosphere of just eating like publicly and this sort of like small restaurants and stuff is great. But I just wanted to say like with regard to what you were talking about with like the sexual politics of the time, like I mentioned it a bit earlier, and I don't really have like this is like something that I'm a thesis that I'm workshopping or that would require more research for sure.
Yeah,
But
where
the
can I
idea
fund you, Avalon? Where can I
yeah.
can I donate?
Well, like, this idea, and I think I read this in some of the text, like the idea that some, like, in place of like the socialist ideal, some actual like traditional thinking actually reemerged during the reform free market period, just to like fill in the void spiritually and ideologically of what people had to believe. So, maybe some of that like social conservatism reemerged in through that period as well, and not to like paint the Mao period too like rosily because it's not like male chauvinism disappeared overnight, unfortunately. But I think it definitely was allowed to return in the Deng period, especially because like a really important point to make actually is a lot of the I think free floating like nature of this film also emerges from like when migrant laborers were just like because China has a hukou system, which is basically like you're registered to your local province or community, and you don't really get benefits if you're outside of that local area, which is cause a lot of problems, especially for migrant laborers. So you just have these people who basically like no benefits and like basically nothing, just like hanging around with each other, like going to the club and like having like unprotected sex, basically, or like getting access to ketamine. So like I
Yeah,
think
well, I remember
some of the
when
clamping down is connected to that as well.
right. When I was first watching Touch of Sin, I think the second
Oh,
segment
yeah, yeah.
because
They talk about like AIDS and stuff or whatever.
yeah, and that struck me out as like being a very like interesting texture to bring into that movie. I mean, like that, all of his movies are really dense, but that one is like just with the episodic nature. There's like so much communicated.
Right.
Um, yeah, the so you were talking about Misato. When are we doing our end of Ava commentary?
Oh, I would be down. Yeah,
Yeah, we need to
yeah.
do that like as the apocalypse is happening, like right before like
Sure, sure.
nuclear war. We can just be like, all right, let's bang out this commentary.
Yeah, yeah. When
End of
when when
Ava.
when when Joe Brandon decides to visit Taiwan and like China nukes like America or something
Oh
like.
no! Now you've one instantly dated this commentary, and two, you've increased the chance that that might actually happen through hyperstition. So
Yeah, sorry.
be very careful what you wish for. Also, I just want to say, like, not apropos of anything, but I'm starting to think that like whenever I hear someone say hyperstition, I'm like, is hyperstition like just basically like a like the gentrified way to say like magic or like synchronicity or any of these other like
Maybe,
topics that
yeah.
academics don't talk about? Because I
Yeah, yeah,
swear to
yeah.
God, I hear this phrase used and I'm like, what you're describing is like ritual. It's just basic ritual. And they're like, no,
Yeah, I was about to say.
but through neo Delusian Landian hyperstition. I'm like, just
Oh,
fucking
fucking.
like like. But yeah, yeah, that shows that amuses me. I love the hyper linguisticification of like topics that go through the academic ringer. Also, I love him waltzing back in and out of here, and he's got like
And
the
the camera
goddamn
panning. Yeah.
he's got like the hyper 80s like Don Johnson Miami Vice pants.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, this is the guy with the Canton aunts. Like, he has access to all that swaggy, like, 80s American culture.
Hell yeah. I mean, he looks great.
Yeah. I mean, I would dress like that. But also, like, oh my god, this shot, like, that very faint light in the corner, and the dude smoking. Oh, man.
Yeah, this is like half of Unknown Pleasures right here. It's just this
Yeah,
shot
yeah,
of like
literally.
you're in the middle of the fucking dark and you're just like you got like a light that goes on and off and some flies and some like
Yeah.
15 dudes smoking in a chamber.
And I love all those steel bowls on the side. Like, I've eaten out of that so many times. And I just love those small details in this film. Like way earlier in the film, when one of the girls was getting their hair permed, and like just in the corner, there's like these half like sliced cabbages. I'm like, yep, that's my grandparents' kitchen right there. Yeah, and I also, I mean, again, this idea of like the camera sitting still and allowing the characters. It's interesting actually when he decides to either have the camera follow a character into a separate space and then to pan back, or to stick to the still frame and allow the characters to walk in and out and sort of creating this sort of uh world outside the frame in addition to what's happening inside the frame. I would have to look over again like what drives that decision, because to me it seems pretty deliberate.
Yeah. What he sets up like the language of the movie in the first couple scenes where you're like some scenes are done via tableau where it's like framed in the theater itself, right? Where you have people and the camera's locked down and you're just watching them like move in and out and like this, right? Like you're not like following him as he's moving around in the back. And I don't know, the decision to like not do that. I do wonder because now that they're back in Feng Yang, maybe that like has something to do with it. Maybe there's like if you look at the film, like and if you count these things, I wonder if there's less camera movement shots in.
In Fenyang, or
Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
maybe.
Okay.
I think I might be talking out my ass, but it's an interesting idea at the very least.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Yeah, I mean, that sense of like homeliness and being grounded in a fixed location. Yeah, it's possible. Don't you ever just want to scream and carry bricks?
Yeah, no, I gotta tell you, I don't think I've ever, I don't think I've ever wanted to do that. I love how he's just watching them though.
Yeah, yeah, he's
Fucking,
just like drinking his beer and like is a huge ass bottle of beer and like smoking. This dude's chilling.
he's got like they got like those old school fucking like Looney Tunes bottles of liquor. Like
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, they're still like that in China.
hell yeah.
Yeah, I love this is such a specific detail, but I love all the bottles we get in this movie. Like when they're eating and there's just huge bottles of like vinegar and soy sauce on the table, and just seeing like the different textures and colors of them.
Oh, now you're making me hungry for soy sauce. Fuck.
Nah, dude, I'm getting ready for lunch, but like I'm
Dude, look
just
at this though.
thinking of,
This is cinema right here. This is what I'm talking about.
oh, this is Kino. This is pure
This
Kino.
this is the fucking shot in La Ventura when like the camera starts like pushing in
Yeah.
when there's no one looking around. Like that
Ah,
perfect. This is perfect.
perfect. The
If
two
you're watching
doors.
alongside us, this is perfect. Like if you want to
No,
know like what's great about movies, just watch that again.
the two doors framing the pile the perfectly ordered pile of bricks in the center as you hear the screams like moving further away, just pure perfection. Like, also love the door framing the performance here too.
Yeah.
Oh, this is the song I just linked to you. Fearful. Such a good song
Get
by
the
Sure.
When's that Feng Yang remix dropping?
Yeah, this is literally the this is like the Fei Yang like 80s remix of the song.
Give me the give me the platform concept album. Actually, I would buy the soundtrack to this movie because this movie does have a lot of songs in it.
Yeah, totally. I mean, honestly, the soundtrack would basically just be a history lesson of Chinese popular culture.
But dude,
Like,
this thing. Do
oh,
you see how subtle that bit with the focus was? You see
oh,
how fucking
it's
subtle that.
incredible. It like pushes it a little bit, it readjusts, and you just have that empty space.
You
It's so
don't notice it
good.
at all. That
No,
is
no.
so precise. Like that's
Okay,
yeah. He's busted it out now. He's
my
going for it.
favorite scene is about to come up, so
Oh,
let's
I'm
just
into
be
it.
ready.
Let's
Let's
go.
just be ready. Okay, that's great too. As you said before, like the top, it's not just like a horizontal like texture, but also vertical as well. Oh
Yes, there's depth.
yes. Oh my god. Great. Shiful. Okay, the reason why this scene affects me so much, not just because like the scene itself is perfect, like the green cabinets in the background, her sort of being just dead center in this huge space, the overexposed light, everything. And like she's gonna start dancing very soon, and it's just like genuinely one of the most transcendent and beautiful things I've ever seen. But also because this particular song, I mean, it was extremely popular. Surrey is a Taiwanese pop star in the 80s. It was extremely popular, and my parents played this song in the car all the time when I was a kid.
Oh,
So
wow, that's great.
I just have extremely vivid memories of like driving through of like Beijing at night and hearing this song on like our radio. Um, so it has like a great emotional value to me, and seeing it just like applied, and as I said, like the most sublime, like incredibly like directed scene. It's just so good. And Zhao Tao obviously is a dancer originally, so she kills it.
Oh yeah, yeah,
But there's also like, I mean, you know, the desperation in the emotions of the song, and like how she evokes it through her dance in this incredibly just desolate like office. Ah,
yeah. I mean, I think every movie would be improved by just having like Zhao Tao come out of nowhere and just do like a weird, semi-awkward dance number.
yeah. Ah, but she's so good here.
Oh yeah,
Oh man, imagine being able to film this must have been so much fun. Like she probably had free reign to do whatever dance she wanted. Especially because Ja probably trusts her, you know, it's her instinct as to what dance moves would work.
yeah. But after almost 2 hours of like very brutal and stark imagery and emotions and like withdrawn passions, now we just get this full explosion of it.
I know, it's so good.
I mean, this is a lot of ways it's the climax of the fucking movie, you know?
Yeah. I mean, we still have like half an hour, but or 40 minutes, but you're right. It's like I think it's a prelude to as we've talked about already, like certain tendencies that Ja would really emphasize in his later films, where he has moments where he allows like this cathartic explosion of violence or of emotion or of something. And I think like this scene is it's really the only scene in the film where it happens. But it is, I think, like a demonstration that that tendency had kind of already existed in his films.
Yeah. Oh my god, her in
Also,
this
her
in this
in the
outfit.
uniform.
Oh my god. Okay,
You know,
look. Oh, I don't know if we need to go too far into this, but god damn.
I know you said like you know I would just be going to like Chinese history and you would just be simping for like Zhao Tao for 2 hours, but like no, but so true. Like I think we both share like a love of like women in bureaucratic fashion with like large shoulders and shit, you know, and like the
I
hat.
I'm just I don't know. I'm a sucker for like if you have a lady and there's a uniform there, or like
Oh, it's
just like
great.
like a suit or whatever, any kind of professional gear. I'm into it.
It's perfect. Yeah.
Oh my god, this part with like the fucking blinking lights. This is
Uh,
so fucking corny.
you
It's
know,
great.
and I think he's very self-aware about that, just like how forced it is. Oh my god. And the designs of the guitars are like that's like straight 80s like hair metal shit. Even the drum kit has like four, is like three hanging toms. It's like, is that really necessary?
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, I'll tell you what. I have never I haven't been to like a ton of performances, I guess, but I've
Yeah.
never like been to a place where like people are throwing goddamn banana peels and oranges at you. Like to me, that's some goddamn like
That's some
medieval
Looney
shit.
Tunes shit. Yeah.
There's like they're throwing like onions at 'em.
No, but okay, I will say I do appreciate how like each performance they have, the crowd noticeably gets smaller and smaller and less positive and more antagonistic. Like, I just love that. And like I guess there's a million ways of reading that. Like the cynical Western way is like, oh, the people finally have freedom of expression to dislike art that doesn't, that they don't like, unlike you're under Mao. But I just think it's like I wouldn't be shocked if it's just like the quality of the art just got worse. I'm gonna be real with you. Like I might take that Maoist opera play whatever over this. Like
Well, at least that shit was, what like they had that red detachment was like glorious technicolor. Like
right,
there's
yeah.
that, right? I think I think it's also like these guys just kind of suck.
Yeah,
It's not
it
their
is
fault.
kind of
But you can imagine like this world where there's a whole bunch of people just like them, and
yeah, exactly.
like
No, I think that was the case, yeah.
yeah, so it's like these guys are probably like the bottom of the barrel. What that looks like.
Bro, and it's like, yeah, here's like five people are watching.
Yeah, this is so fucking depressing, man.
We gotta love privatization of culture, am I right?
Yeah, this is like at the beginning of the movie when it's like you're at the most dead end position and you're just you're staring at your life in a bottle.
I know, yeah.
So as we're kind of nearing like the last portion of the movie, I want to talk to you about uh like where do you stand with Ja right now, and like how did you get into him, and like where do you feel um like you're looking forward to seeing him going, if anything? Like, is he one of your
Uh-huh.
guys? Like, is he one of your like, oh, I
Yeah.
follow like whatever he's doing?
Oh, totally. Oh my god. I mean, as I said, this is one of my favorite films of all time. And Jia was really my introduction to art house Chinese cinema. Mainland Chinese cinema
Interesting.
at least. Because like, okay, my backstory as to how I discovered Jia is fucking hilarious. I was so I really got to cinema around the time that Xi Jinping came to power. And
The proper time.
Xi Jinping gave an interview where he said one of his favorite filmmakers is Jia Zhangke.
It's also one of the only ones he knows. No one said that.
and, and I was like, "Oh, who is this
You,
guy?" You know.
you were like, wee woo, based alert.
So yeah, but I wasn't even a communist at the time. I was just like, "Huh? Well, if the party leader likes it, then I must, at least enjoy it." Um,
That's very strange, actually. That's like someone like looking at the book list that Obama puts out every year or whatever. Like,
yeah,
it's very
yeah.
strange. Anyway, go on.
Although, yeah. So I watched Still Life. That was my first Jaw film, and I was fascinated by it, and I think that was probably like the first proper slow cinema film I had watched. But I was fascinated by it, so I was
Oh
like,
wow,
"Oh
so that
shit."
was like a huge gateway for you to a lot of things.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I watched Still Life, and I was like, "Damn, I need to check out his other work." And then I watched A Touch of Sin because it had just come out, and I was like, "Wow, this is a huge departure."
Yeah, oh yeah.
But I was super into it. So I mean, I appreciated him as like my introduction to like a certain part of China that I was sort of sheltered from because my parents are just like, no, 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 you're not gonna like be poor or whatever, um, or you're not gonna have to live through like this particular experience of China. And also, it was my introduction to like as I said, like a certain documentary tendency within mainland Chinese cinema. And then yeah, I followed him ever since. I revisited his older films. I watched everything backwards. And then, I was there for when Mountains May Depart first came out. I was there for the discourse around Mountains May Depart when it first came out.
I wish I
And
was
then,
there at the time. I wish I was being a cinephile at the time because I would have
yeah.
had some fucking words to say.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I kind of fell into it a little bit too. Because I'll be honest, The Mountains May Depart is not my favorite Jia Zhangke film. I don't think it's as bad as like some people dissed it as at the
Okay,
time.
I think it's not my favorite either. People are out of their minds when they're saying like it's bad. Like I get like you
Oh
don't
God,
like it,
no.
but don't like say it's bad because come
No,
on,
God,
man.
no. That's ridiculous.
No.
Yeah, but like then I was there for when Ashes Pierced White also came out, which I was like, this is fucking incredible. So I think with Ashes Pierced White and having seen his entire filmography, I sort of was just in like, fuck it, like, Ja, take me wherever the hell you want.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like,
No,
I don't
that's
really have a direction for him, you know?
yeah. No, I see what you mean. Yeah, when I was first getting into foreign film, Ashes Pierce White was like one of the first ones I watched, and I saw that, and I
Yeah.
liked it, but I also didn't like really get it because it seemed like okay, like there's just like a bunch of stuff happened, and it's only later after I watched all of his other movies that I understood that like Ashes Pierce White is basically like his like compilation movie. Like
Yeah, yeah,
it
totally.
just has all the stuff from his other ones. So like I was getting like the greatest hits album of whatever, and going back into it, I was like, oh my no, this is genius. But yeah, like after that, I revisited all his stuff, and yeah, I just find him interesting in as much as like his current space is hard to discern for me.
Right.
It's like
Yeah.
what direction could he go? I don't know. It's I mean I'm here for whatever it is because I think it'll undoubtedly be interesting.
Yeah.
But
Although, can I say one thing though?
yeah,
And I'm ready for him to disprove me on this. But I don't want him to leave mainland China, actually.
I don't see why he would. I mean,
I'm just saying, like, he's really close buddies with the Thai director, another like slow cinema icon, Pisha Power Satekun, and he recently made his first non-Thai film. And like Ja and Weir Satekun very much have a dialogue with each other, and like really good friends, and you can see like
no.
the influence of each other cross pollinating. So I don't know if he'll follow the same direction as him. But I don't know how that would work. Maybe my imagination is just defeating me right now. But
Yes,
because he,
you were talking about like the reintegration of like certain patriarchal things, and like
yeah,
that is a interesting part here with this. Um, yeah, I would be open to him like doing something. I wouldn't necessarily want it though. Like I feel, I mean, Mountains May Depart was kind of him doing that, but not really.
oh,
It's
I guess, but not really. I mean, it still ends up in China. At the end of the day,
yeah, he's still in. I'm just gonna go
and it's
weirdo
about
mode with
It's
this.
about Chinese characters at the end of the day.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, again, I'd follow him with whatever he's doing because I think, I mean,
Yeah,
when I was doing the sight and sound poll, I I had a tough time because I knew I wanted him on the list, and
right.
I
Yeah,
was like, do I want to pick the world or am I gonna go with uh, Ashes Pierce White? And like for me, Ashes Pierce White was like operating within a tradition of it was almost like the revisionist heroic bloodshed, like how we have the revisionist western. Like
right,
there's actually quite a few revisionist heroic bloodshed movies, and I mean that may be like the best one probably, but I think it's like he was operating in an interesting mode. Like I feel like he's so much more comfortable with like working within what we would call genre now, even though it's his own like distinct version of it, where
uh huh,
he's kind of become like like he recognizes like this is like a tradition that I want to be a part of, and it's like so that there is heroic bloodshed, there's wuxia, and there's also like him linking in Hong Kong into like the textures that he's like wanting to have a dialogue with, right?
right.
And I feel like the world is kind of um where that begins, right? Where you're talking about like his universal tendency to the particular, and the world is like through this very particular lens, like it achieves its own universal symbol. I felt like that really achieved everything with that. And the world is like one of my favorite movies. I just really adore it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And when you were talking about like what your intro was with him, I'm trying to think of like what's like the Jia Pleb filter movie. Um, and
I mean, this could be one of them.
is this the Pleb filter? Because I feel like this is the one that people watch the most,
Really? Okay, that was not my experience. Like when I was initially
or at least
involved in
talk about.
okay, interesting. Because when I was initially involved in jaw discourse like a decade ago, Still Life and A Touch of Sin were like his big hits,
Yeah,
and part of it,
maybe I have like a more like when I got into it view of things. Yeah,
right,
I don't, you know, I mean, not that like it really matters or whatever, but
right.
I, no, yeah, I feel like this is approachable. I feel like Mountains is probably his Pleb filter. I really do think. I think, you know, sorry to anyone who dislikes
Interesting.
Mountains.
Okay.
Someday we'll do our Mountains commentary. it'll just it'll just be us like
Oh man, I'll have a lot to say about that because I was there for when it happened. You know.
yeah, we're gonna have to like dig up the whole archaeology of discourse and shitty reviews around that film.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
No, I mean,
we'll go in Letterbox and see all like the 2.5 stars.
no, and I had a friend who's like, oh, I told you, like the guy, the co-writer, the co-screenwriter, Larry Gross for 48 Hours and Streets of Fire, his son and I were good friends in middle school, and he took him to Cannes to see Mountains May Depart. And when he came back from Cannes, missing school, and pissing off all the teachers, uh, he was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry, Evelyn, but I think Mountains May Depart kind of sucks ass, actually."
Oh no,
And I was just like, "Oh," I was like, "Dude, don't tell me my boy Ja fucked up. Don't You can't tell me that."
no! You
Like,
know what? That this is why there was no third 48 Hours movie because of shit like this. This is why we can't have nice things. That's why we never had we never had 72 hours or whatever.
yeah, yeah,
See though, like this, like their manager essentially. You see this figure
yeah.
pop up time and time again in Jaws movies. Like he
Oh,
always has a
big
guy like
time.
this. There's always like some fucking like half bureaucratic, sometimes a gangster, sometimes like just a fucking asshole role.
Like, yeah, patriarchal, misogynist, like piece of shit. Yeah.
Yeah, but never like again, never like I would say contrived.
Oh
He
no, definitely not.
he never
Yeah.
does it like, you know, I've been watching a lot of Eastwood films lately. I'm like, when someone's a bad guy in a Clint Eastwood movie, you know they're a bad guy because they act like the most fucking like asshole psychopath that you could think of. And you know, he's very clear about that. Whereas like Jaws, like he's
Right.
like this, right? Like where they're just not talking. Like he just lets him like dig his own grave for the audience where you're like, no, this guy sucks.
Yeah, basically. Also, I just have to say, like, I know you mentioned that actually the first time you watched this, you felt like it was just 90 minutes had like blown by, even though
Oh
the film is
yeah.
much longer. But like, I will say, like, and I'm not saying this is a negative thing at all. I mean, especially as someone who is obviously a huge fan of slow cinema, but I do feel myself being like weighed down by this point in the film. Like I've gone through so much.
Yeah.
Like the film really does make you feel like the weight of a decade is like kind of passing, and not in a negative sense again.
Yeah, I mean there's so much that happens and the film is really, I think, concisely edited to where I never really feel it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean I could definitely see that. I mean, I don't know. I've grown accustomed more and more to like I again, like I've talked about this before. I think probably even on other commentaries, but I think film should
Mhm.
either only be like, you know, orbiting 90 minutes or orbiting like, you know,
3 hours.
yeah, and like this is like once you get over 230, I think you're in a good spot. Like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think it's that middle period that trips people up, and
It's
like
like
when you
210, yeah, as you said before.
210, there's a lot of movies where like at 210 feels like 4 hours, and
Yeah.
that's what trips me up. Whereas like something like this, I'm like, no, no, this goes by quickly. Like I mean, I'm
Yeah.
surprised we're already at the kind of like the we
Oh
only like
yeah,
21
like the
minutes to
way
go. That's
yeah,
nuts.
way past 2 hours. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, but okay, that roadside performance stuff is so sad to me.
It's depressing
Like
as hell.
that's like the peak of like nowhere to go, middle of nowhere, just like trying to get by, like under the contract of some shitty manager, you know.
See, look at this though. Great storytelling. When he's taking
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
cigarette out, and then like he shows like the logo and like the stuff that's on the inside of his jacket.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's how you fucking do it, man.
And then the landscape with the boat panning to that, so good. God damn, the more I watch this movie, the more like I gotta go back to mainland China. Like I was just in Hong Kong, but Hong Kong is like a totally different vibe, you know?
You're like Hong Kong was goddamn Disney World.
Yeah, I need northern China.
To take me back to Paradise City, Feng Yang.
I actually should try to visit Fenyang one day. It's not
Yeah,
too
you
far
know
from
what?
Beijing.
Seriously, you should do that and take pictures. I would love to like see your the platform tour.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I wonder if it's changed. It might have. Like, I know. Yeah, it's totally possible that it's like fucking unrecognizable by this point. If there's one thing that Xi Jinping has been doing, is he has been sort of developing infrastructure of places like Finyang. So who knows? I could go there and there's a paved road for the first time in its history.
Holy shit! Oh, you know what this bit reminds me of? It reminds me of The Passenger.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I was literally gonna bring that up. Speaking of Antonioni again, like gotta love the desert. You know, I mean, they've hung out in the desert a few times by this point, but like
Well, but
transportation breaking down in the desert.
that was like the rocky, like mountainous desert, though. This is like the
Right.
desert
The
where you're in the
desert,
middle of
desert.
bumfuck nowhere.
Yeah, maybe they're close to they're. I don't know if they're still in Fin. Yeah, like I don't actually. I'm glad the film doesn't like tell you exactly where they are. I kind of like that feeling of just like roaming
Okay,
around, not quite
can I
knowing where you are.
can I talk about that? I've never actually spoken about that with someone. I hate it
Yeah,
in movies when it cuts to a location and
yeah,
they like there's like a big title card where it's like you're
yeah,
now
yeah,
in
yeah.
Taipei or now you're
Or
in
they make it
Australia.
super, or they make it super obvious by like having a bunch of insert shots of like famous buildings
Well,
with like
okay,
montage music.
this is the infamous thing with Rio, right? Where like every time like you watch Fast Five and like the first thing you see is that
Yeah.
giant Christ statue and you're like, okay, yeah, you don't need to like say the title. I know we're in Brazil, like I know it. Like we're good, you know. But
We're good,
they do
yeah.
it anyway. They do it anyway, and it pisses me off because it's like that kind of stuff is real condescending to your
Okay, I
viewer.
was right. I was right. I was about to say they're probably close to Inner Mongolia. I was fucking right.
Hold up. But okay,
I
but
was
like, but you can draw that conclusion, right? Like he doesn't.
exactly, yeah.
He gives you the space to think about shit. That's the
Okay.
important thing.
Also, this framing impeccable. Having them
Oh yeah,
sleep in the foreground, the bus in the background, all the
that's how
people
you do it.
crowding, and you have the door and the window, so you can see like multiple compartmentalized parts of the background. It's
Oh yeah.
perfect. Oh my god. Now we have our Millennium Mambo, Daughter of the Dust scene, you know.
Daughter of the Dust.
The youth getting lit when they're actually hopeless deep down inside.
Yeah. Ooh, let's go. Ennui. 1980s. Let's go.
1980s, let's go. They might be approaching the 90s at this point. Like
Oh man.
we haven't quite got to Tiananmen yet, you know, but
We'll get there. We'll get there.
we'll get there. We'll get. I don't think the film ever mentions it, but you know, the effect is felt.
You know, I'm really fascinated. Not that this applies to this film. You were talking about Taiwan earlier. I'm fascinated by
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
uh like cinema in Hong Kong or the mainland or um fucking what is it in Japan or Korea where like all those places. I've seen so many movies where it's like we have to go somewhere where like no one's gonna find out who we are, and like they always go to Taiwan. And like I was
Yeah.
watching, I swear that okay, maybe someone can like tell me if I'm wrong, but I think this happens in like one of those uh Mamoru Oshii Karabos or Karibos or whatever the fuck that trilogy is called, the one with
I haven't
the
seen it.
military guy.
Yeah.
There's
Okay.
one where like they just go to like they're like, all right, let's go on a vacation to Taiwan, and I'm like,
Well, Taiwan, as I think I briefly mentioned in the Millennium Mambo commentary, it is this like Taiwan's identity and like its place within the world system is so strange because it is the intersection of like so many different influences of like Japan, mainland China, the United States, and it has become this like wedge buffer zone for various different geopolitical interests. And I
yeah,
think
because
like
the way that Johnny
yeah.
To shows it in Exile, it's like the Wild West. You're like, okay, like
Yeah,
there's
yeah,
no
yeah, yeah.
rules, you know, it's just
Wait, I thought Exiled was in Macau, not Taiwan.
no, no, it is in Macau. You're right. You're right. What? No,
Yeah, yeah,
he
yeah.
did do a movie in Taiwan though. I
Yeah, he
think
might have. I forgot which one, but yeah, no, that was in Macau. Which
it was in
I
Macau.
mean, that's just if it's the Las Vegas of the East, I guess it's its own Wild West, you know.
Yes, yes, that's true.
But yeah, I think it's just like people probably exploited that awkward political status,
Yeah,
to get
well,
away from things. Yeah.
infamously with like Hong Kong movies, half of them were like in Better Tomorrow. There's a whole like subplot where they go to
Right.
Taiwan, and
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
that's such a. I mean, it is kind of like this interlaced like production idea, right? I don't know if that still exists, but it definitely existed in the 80s and 90s, where so many martial arts films where it's like you're making a wuxia film, you're not going to shoot it in Hong Kong, you're going to go to Taiwan to get the landscapes and everything. Because I
Right.
think
Yeah.
I think Dragon Inn or Touches Zen were like that. Maybe both of them were. Because Kingo switched to like his production company went over to Taiwan, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, from Shaw Brothers, he went to Taiwan. Yeah.
That's right. Uh, you know that scene with like they have like the nice fancy like embroidered bits on their chairs and like
Uh
these
huh.
like it's so much more colorful than it was before.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, my man's been growing out his hair for ages.
I know that
For
that was
for
me
the
in
entire
that was
80s.
that was me in Hong Kong. I just cut my hair. I haven't cut my hair in 2 years, so I
Did
feel him.
did you do like a dramatic thing where you looked in the mirror and realized that you were an entirely different person?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I did. Yeah,
I always
I
love
was,
that shit in movies where like if you need to express like a character change, like you always have them get a haircut.
or like get rid of glasses.
Oh, I hate that. I hate that shit
I
so
hate it.
much.
Yeah, I hate
That
it
is
too.
the worst degree of like American juvenilia cliche.
Yeah, it's bad.
Oh my god, her in this outfit. Can't get over it.
So good.
Just
Oh,
like okay,
so
just like a
okay.
lady in a
Sometimes,
hat. Ladies
yeah,
wear
yeah,
hats.
yeah.
It's cool.
Okay, I'll be honest. I'll be honest.
Be honest with me.
Sometimes I have dreams about just being a low-level bureaucrat in the regime, you know?
Yeah, I like that you're able to reveal your Chunibyo fantasies to me, Evelyn. I really appreciate that. It's a sign of trust. I respect that.
I also think I would just look hot in the outfit, but you know.
Yeah, yeah, there's that too. I love that shit. That is the thing that only our section of our brain poisoned internet
Yeah.
clique would say, where it's like,
Yeah.
oh my, sometimes I have a fantasy of being a low level bureaucrat in the mainland, and you're like,
Low-level
okay,
regime bureaucrat. I don't
I,
ask any questions, I just follow orders.
I just follow orders and I wear a nice coat.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But of course I do it for the people, you know.
Right, you don't do it for the aesthetic pleasure. No, definitely
Yeah,
not.
yeah,
Why would
yeah,
you?
yeah, yeah. Well, I'm
Yeah,
totally not operating in a degenerated revisionist worker state, yeah.
yeah. Evie was talking about yesterday where I was like, it's like, oh yeah, you can do an aestheticization of politics, but just don't be lame about it.
Yeah, yeah, that's the one caveat to Walter Benjamin, yeah.
I mean, to a certain extent, I kind of basically agree with that.
No, I agree. Just don't be cringe about it. Just don't be
I,
lame about
I
it.
feel the same way about cults in a lot of ways. It's like, all right, do what you got to do, but like at least what you can ever say, like Aum Shinrikyo had a pretty cool aesthetic, right? Like they kind of came up with
Yeah,
like their own cool
yeah.
energy. Um, and now like in 20 years from now, when I'm like in court, someone's gonna bring up this recording of me praising
Yeah.
Aum
No,
Shinrikyo.
when I become like a regime low level regime bureaucrat, like I don't know, like the Trans Cascadian breakaway communist state or whatever, and like I'm put on trial for like being a traitor, like they'll play this clip as well, you know.
I know that they'll they'll get my my hard drive of this shit all downloaded on the whole
Yeah,
gun in my
yeah,
head. See, but I love this contrast though, because even all these years later, like this
yeah.
fucking like trench is still
It's
here.
still there, exactly. No, like that's interesting too, because like even though the Deng period is portrayed as like a period of like obviously, and this is true at a macroeconomic standpoint of view, like huge growth in GDP and whatnot. At the minutia of like everyday life, especially in rural inland areas, it was mostly just like stagnation and like the death of any
The
hope
photo of Hong
whatsoever.
Kong on the wall.
Oh yeah, no, that's Canton actually.
Is it okay?
Because I think that's the same picture as the postcard that Jong Jun gave to him. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah, if I'm remembering correctly. Yeah. No, but I like how the narrative has come full circle basically. Like, everyone sort of returned and sort of reunited with each other at the end of the day.
Well, he loves that, doesn't he? He loves building his movies around circles.
Yeah, totally. Okay, speaking of aesthetics though, like that traditional Chinese aesthetic is kind of fire.
Oh, with the fucking tiger
The
on the.
tiger, yeah.
It is kind of cool.
Yeah.
I think my
Okay.
grandma once had something similar to that, but like
Oh,
it was
interesting.
like with
Okay.
like more Hispanic iconography, but like one of the, like those plates that you would put on a cabinet.
Right, right. No, I think like for me the ultimate aesthetic synthesis for China is like the traditional shit with like the communist stuff because like as you said like I don't mind my like my like 20th century ML like regime as long as you're not cringe about it. And I think China like really took that to heart in my opinion because like
Yeah, yeah.
I think the Cultural Revolution aesthetics are cool as fuck personally.
No, no. Okay. And anyone who's like, no, that you're wrong about, no, it's still cool. I'm sorry. Like, you know, yes, yes, millions of deaths, but hey, you know, say what you will.
And okay, millions of deaths, like okay, not to get into it, but I would even dispute that figure. But anyways,
Okay, okay, okay. Like purported, alleged millions of deaths,
alleged,
and
yes, yeah.
now we're also going to get put on trial in 20 years for saying this. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. But anyway, yeah,
yeah. The see now, if you look at this now, like the images are so much more softer. Everything's like a lot more
right. The
calm.
lighting is very soft, especially the from the window. Yeah,
See, that's what I mean about like this film, like where I feel like it breezes by. Because this, when it ends, it doesn't feel heavy to me. Like this feels like it
right,
ends in a very like soft, like semi comfortable place, even though there's melancholy to it.
right. No, you make a good point. I think it's always the middle point in a film that gets a bit weary. But I think that's maybe true to an extent here, but not again, not in a bad sense. Like because I think now that we've reached this point, maybe there's a beginning to be a semblance of like, okay, there might be a direction to life in China at this point, Like, they're planning to stay behind. They're gonna like find their like low level regime bureaucrat job or whatever. Or they're gonna like open a small business, I guess, and that's just gonna be life.
Yeah, I love this bit. Where he's like a gift, and she's like, I can afford it.
Yeah,
Fuck
I
you.
could have.
That's what a job gets me.
Yeah, exactly.
No, the way that she looks at him, like this is like
Uh-huh.
now we're like really focusing on like these two people and their relationship, and
Right. Yeah, yeah, we have
I
like a
just
medium shot now.
I
Yeah.
love the subtle like glances that they do at each other.
Yeah, because it's like, they were separated basically for years. And now they're sort of reconciling. And there is something a bit like bittersweet about it or like awkward about it. Um and I love
I
just like,
mean,
yeah, the conversation they're having right now. Like, when did you start smoking? And she was like, well,
a
a long
long
time
time
ago.
ago, yeah.
Yeah, I've always done this. And, that disconnect in very subtle ways. I think it's actually kind of beautiful and poignant in a
Well,
way.
this is I love this, even though I don't smoke at all in real life. I love,
Yeah,
and
well,
this is
I
like
do. So
this is the Howard Hawks thing of like we're just gonna light each other's cigarettes and just bask in
yeah.
each other's company. Never get tired of that.
Okay, social smoking is the best way to smoke, though. If I'm being real with you,
I buy
like,
it.
yeah. I mean, smoking alone is nice. Sometimes you need it just to cool down, but like, it's nice to do it with someone. Okay, yeah. Also, the introduction of non-diegetic music of the score. That's new. it really feels like, yeah, it's like, Jia is intervening in the narrative a little bit and is, I guess, like trying to bring it to a resolution, I guess.
Yeah,
It's like
yeah,
it's like a film that is fundamentally built on a broken teleology is trying to find one in its last minutes.
yeah. I think a lot of films do that though. Like, there's so many examples of like, like especially early features. I feel where like they just like immediately collapse into their ending, and there's kind of a cascading feel to it.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, again, sorry not to constantly bring this motherfucker up, but like, when you think about like Michael Mann's Thief, right? Like that ends
Yeah,
like
yeah.
with such a like just everything falls apart, right? And it's
Hmm.
very, all the build up to it just immediately, because it's not even like an explosive climax too much. It's just like it's the natural outcome, and it's like a spiral that just like wound its way immediately right back to its source.
Hmm. Yeah.
Oh my god, I've been in so many places exactly like this in Chicago. These
Oh, me.
these
Oh,
fucking
Chicago. Interesting.
these dingy
Okay.
ass like part stores. Yeah.
Because to me, this is so China specific.
Well,
Like
I
as a
mean,
kid, yeah.
I won't say exactly, but like the vibe of it, like
Yeah, yeah.
this
No, I
this
get it.
really industrial, like kind of
Yeah, yeah,
ramshackle place where
yeah.
there's a whole bunch of stuff or everything. Especially that the detail of like all those parts underneath the stairs. That there's a lot
Right,
of Chicago places where like the stairs are also a shelf.
right. I also just love the abacus on the counter. My grandma was a librarian, so she used that all the time.
Wow.
Yeah, it really no, you're right. It really does feel like, the lighting here coming through the window, the soft greens and grays. It really feels like we're winding down in the film.
Yeah, well, we're not in like these like very I don't know, like the locales get less oppressive. There's
Yeah,
a
yeah.
focus more on like
Well, it's like the return to
life,
normal life, basically.
or even like the new normal, right? Because it didn't
Or
even
the
look
new,
like
yeah,
this.
actually the new
Yeah,
normal. Yeah, 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 no, you're right. Like the establishing of, I guess, the new like capitalist norm of Dengis China, basically.
I
Yeah, it's
also
like,
I want to give
yeah.
massive credit to Wang Hongwei and Zhao Tao for like
Yes, yes.
portraying like aging in a really incredible way.
In a
Like
really graceful, sort of natural way. Yeah.
rarely has does it go as smoothly as this. Like
Right.
they really just go like lean straight into like, okay, their
Uh,
characters are now adults and now there's this whole
and they're
thing.
responsible. Yeah. No, look. Okay, this shot is really important. This final shot. It's like I always read this as like the triumph of the bourgeois capitalist family, basically.
Yeah,
It's
yep,
like
everyone's
for
in their
all the
place.
for all the revolution, all of Mao's revolutionary fervor of creating a new humanity, a totally new social system. In the end, like a decade later, it gave way to just the way things the way things are quote unquote supposed to be according to the West.
Yeah, yeah, and the you have like the I think the either the radio or the television in the background, right? And it's like,
Yeah,
yeah, it's really fucking. Also, the idea of like him being asleep, right? And
asleep,
this
right? And she's taking care of the child. Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's something again. I think it's a bit bittersweet.
a
But I
bit,
also
it's a
think
lot bittersweet.
it is a very bittersweet. But I also think it's kind of latent with possibility because I think there's a child. That means there's the promise for a new generation and a consideration of something new. I mean, by the time this film came out, like the film ends in 90. It ended in 1991. And when the film comes out in like 2000, this kid is like a teenager.
Mm.
So I think Ja is also hinting that there's a future for China that may or may not take this direction, basically. And as the film begins and as it ends with a loud noise, you know.
Yeah, definitely not irritating at all. I gotta say, so
But
it's a little bit irritating. Uh, yeah, wow, fucking,
yeah, that was
fucking,
Platform.
fucking masterpiece. Yeah,
That is my I think it's my fifth favorite film of all time. Last or sixth, I forgot where I put on my ranking.
that's that's a big qualification, but I can't begrudge you it. No,
No,
you know,
wait, okay. The Evelyn Wu standard, though, I have to say, that's
no, no, no. But when I think about your taste, it's like this is emblematic of that totally.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know, I will say to anyone who like is listening to this and like hasn't seen the film for some reason or is like watching the film with our commentary, firstly, don't do that first. Like just watch the movie. But
Yeah, you should just watch the film first. Yeah.
I like how we're saying this at the end too. We're a bunch of assholes. Anyway, yeah, just like I don't know, like I've only done like content, quote unquote. I hate that word, but like stuff focused on um like action movies and stuff on this channel so far. But when I put this out, yeah, just like I'll be trying to do more stuff like this in the future, where it's like a variety of various films that I'm interested in. And this is one of them. Like this is a style and a filmmaker that I love, and um, just one I think is massively important. Yeah, like again, like when I did
Hmm.
my Sight and Sound thing, it's like I put the world on there because I was like, no, this is. I think if you like in the film is made so far in the 21st century, I think the world is the most essential in my book.
Yeah.
And this is like, this is me being like the Michael Mann fan and like loving, all his like, post 2000 stuff and you know,
Right.
like what Just starts in this, even though this isn't my favorite of his, it definitely like just creates this very important trend that he's kind of still following today. And yeah, I look forward
Yeah.
to see what he does next.
Well, something I forgot to add while we were watching the film itself is actually that he actually meant to make this. This was actually supposed to be his first film because it was meant to be a series with Xiao Wu, which is this film first depicts like the 70s through the 80s, the late 70s to the 80s, and then like Xiao Wu would be the 90s basically, and then like his films would basically be like a historical progression. But he made Xiao Wu first, so there's an interesting reversal in like his approach to history. But like, I mean, following his filmography, nonetheless, in spite of that little mix-up, I think you do get to experience like essentially the integration of the largest country in the world and one of the oldest civilizations in history into like the global capitalist world economic order basically. And that process in and of itself I think is like a world historical transformation that needs to be understood, and his films are definitely one of the best gateways into understanding it, and probably one of the most accessible, I have to say, because like I could recommend you like Wong Bing's documentaries, but that shit's like 9 hours long, and
Yeah, this is a great way to understand the emotional content of history.
exactly right,
And
the subjective experience of it to an
and
extent.
and
Yeah,
I think film, when people talk about like historical accuracy or whatever, that's always like this debated topic, which I think is
yeah, yeah, yeah,
fundamentally a flawed thing to talk about. But I think
totally,
I think
yeah.
films, if anything, can really help us access times and places and peoples and emotions that we normally like don't have immediate access to. And like I'm not gonna like pass myself as a scholar or whatever, but like like watching a movie like Platform, I can definitely understand the malaise and the ennui of historical forces that actually happened, and what Ja's kind of take on that is, and what his conclusions are from a person who lives years later. But
Right.
yeah, that was Platform. Thanks for hanging out with me, Evelyn, and recording
Oh,
this.
yeah, of course.
Where can people find you?
I mean, I don't have much to plug. I have just follow me on Twitter at Avalon Wu. Uh, and my letterbox is in my bio on Twitter, so you can just follow me there as well for my opinions on movies, I guess. Which
Evelyn, when are you going to start writing longer reviews? It's got to
no,
happen.
I was about to say like I've already sort of drafted like an introductory post to like a Substack, so
Yeah, fucking do it. Yeah.
I guess look out for that in the near future. I mean, I as of now, it seems like I'm probably going to be just writing an entry for each of my film canon, basically. Each film in my film canon, and platform is going to be on there. So who knows? In the near future, we might have it. I might have an even more elaborated piece on this film in particular.
Hell yeah. That sounds good to me. Yeah, that'll be all great to look forward to
Hmm.
before you get arrested and thrown in a Mongolian
Hey,
prison for your
hey.
revisionist viewpoints.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I don't toe the. I like the Cultural Revolution too much. That actually could get you arrested.
I like it too much. That's incredible.
Yeah. All right.
All right. And I think that's that.